Hello and welcome everyone to our virtual Discovery Day focused on physical activity, movement and type 1. Hopefully you all got the chance to take part in our opening poll there and some interesting results. And it's great to see such a diverse group joining us today. My name is Chris, and as well as being the host today, I'm also the Community Partnerships and Events Lead at JDRF. And part of the community engagement team on behalf of the charity. Whilst alongside this, I'm also an athlete living with type 1 diabetes. So we're going to be kicking off today with an opportunity to talk about one of the big themes that we see in everything that we do in terms of community engagement. So we so often hear about movement and physical activity and exercise and sport whilst participating in those living with type 1. And hopefully on this event, we're going to bring you some insight from healthcare professionals, as well as some experiences from the type 1 community, which we hope are going to support your understanding and provide insight throughout and knowledge, which you'll be able to take away and utilize yourselves following this event. We've got an exciting lineup for the morning, and a big thank you to everyone that's joining us. But just to give you some insight on JDRF, for those who might be new to us, we're the leading global organisation funding type 1 diabetes research, and our strength lies in our exclusive focus and singular influence on the worldwide effort to end type 1 diabetes. So our vision is a world without type 1, and we work with the UK government, 2 major funding bodies, the Medical Research Council and National Institute for Health of Research to make type 1 diabetes research a priority. So we focus all of our efforts on trying to ensure that type 1 diabetes is top of the agenda. And these kind of underpin what we do, our 3 key mission goals for where we are currently. So our mission is to improve lives today by accelerating life-changing breakthroughs to cure, prevent and treat type 1 diabetes and its complications. So the more excellent type 1 diabetes research we can get funded, the quicker we can drive developments to cure, treat and prevent type 1 diabetes. So a huge effort from the charity to do the best that we can to support people with the condition, whilst the team that I'm involved in and our support function at the charity also do our best on a day-to-day basis to make sure we can support people with the condition as best we can. But we need to say a massive thank you to the sponsors that have helped us put on an event like today. So thank you to Abbott, Liquide, Dexcom, Insulet and Medtrum for all of your support. We couldn't make events like this happen without you. So big thank you to all of you for your support, from all of us at JDRF and from the community to allowing us to bring this to life. I just wanted to run over a few key housekeeping points just to ensure that everybody has a great experience today. So obviously the event's going to be hosted via Zoom, so to sort of help prevent technical difficulties that you might experience, we sort of recommend that you keep other internet use to a minimum as we go through. Your camera and your microphone will be automatically turned off, so we can't see or hear you. We'd like to also get to know you as we go through the webinar as well. So if you want to talk in the chat, please do. Our hosts in there today are going to be David and Elspeth. So feel free to use it, share your experiences, ask questions, pose questions. We want to hear from you as we go through as well. So please do get involved in the chat and the Q&A functions. And if you do have a question and you write it in the chat, please use a bracket and put the company name or the individual name that you want to pose it to, and then write out your question. That will help us then be able to pose that and ensure that your question gets answered. Whether we can get through it all on today's webinar, we will try to, but if we can't, we will make sure that those questions get posed to the right people, and hopefully they can come back to you as well. So let's get on with the exciting bit, which is a little glance at today's agenda. So hopefully you can see it there. It's packed. It's got some amazing speakers, as I've already said, and we're really looking forward to kicking this off. So just to note a couple of things on there about the comfort breaks. So roughly 10:55 and 11:30 for our comfort breaks. And then the event's going to be closing at 1 p.m. There is an opportunity in that final after 1 p.m. to just hang around in the chat if there are any outstanding questions. We will leave the webinar open for half an hour after 1 p.m. But I'm not going to waste any more time with the introductions and any more detail. We want to get straight into it. So it's going to be my pleasure to introduce you to our first speaker, who is Dr. Matt Campbell. So Matt is an author of over 150 research publications, holds titles with the University of Cambridge, Leeds and Sunderland. He's a certified clinical exercise physiologist, accredited by the American College of Sports Medicine, a registered nutritionist and a member of the Institute of Food, Science and Technology. But he's also had a huge impact on our community that are living with type 1. So I won't steal any more of your thunder, Matt, and I'll hand straight over to you. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. Now, can you see my screen?
Yep. Thanks.
Okay, brilliant. So yeah, I'm a research scientist specializing in exercise, diet, and type 1 diabetes. Alongside my research, I also coach people with type 1, as well as those who support them on how to improve their self-management and health. And a major part of diabetes management and staying healthy is being fit and active. So whether you do little or no exercise, or you're a professional athlete, hopefully what I'm going to talk about today is relevant to you and your diabetes management. So a common question that I'm often asked is, how little is enough? Or to put it another way, what is the minimum amount of exercise I need to do in order to see some benefit? And when I respond by telling people that current physical activity guidelines recommend a minimum of 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous aerobic exercise per week, and going no more than 2 consecutive days without, which in our currency equates to about 30 minutes of swimming, jogging, or dancing every day of the working week, then the next somewhat predictable question is, how on earth am I supposed to fit all of that into my schedule? And as you can probably imagine, I receive, some fairly more succinct and powerful replies to that as well. The answer is actually relatively simple. So generally, more exercise is better than less, and some is certainly better than none. And here we've got some data showing the impact of different levels of physical activity on the risk of developing diabetes complications. So we've got big blood vessel disease on the left and small blood vessel disease on the right. The shaded area in these two figures indicates the minimum recommended amount of physical activity for people with diabetes. And as you can see from the red line on each figure, as you increase physical activity levels, so along the bottom, along the x-axis, you see a reduction in risk in both macro and microvascular disease. But you'll also note that the response is not linear. You tend to get large reductions in risk from going from no exercise to some exercise, even if you struggle to achieve the recommended amount. The risk is then lowered further as you perform more physical activity, but the benefit of this starts to taper off. So more exercise is better than less, but even little amounts of exercise are really helpful. You'll also notice that the dotted lines in these figures get wider apart with increasing levels of physical activity. And these lines represent how confident we are in our estimations and give an indication of how variable the effect might be between different people. So what we can actually derive from this is that at low levels of exercise, we can be fairly confident that everybody will benefit from it, whereas only some people might benefit from higher amounts of exercise and others might not actually see any additional advantage. If we take a look at glucose control, so a very similar pattern exists whereby increased physical activity levels are associated with a greater proportion of time spent in range. This is data illustrated on the left. And then on the right-hand side, we can see that physical activity is associated with more favorable glucose levels on exercise days compared to non-exercising days. So generally, physical activity is not just good for long-term diabetes management, but also day-to-day diabetes management too. But of course, to realize the benefits of exercise, you need to be able to manage glucose levels really well in the short term. And this can be really difficult to do. I work with a range of people with type 1 diabetes, and I can tell you that even professional athletes struggle to manage their glucose levels around exercise. But with the right strategies in place, this is possible. So here we've got a glucose trace of an athlete, a professional athlete I was working with, who really struggled with controlling swings in glucose, and in particular hypos late after exercise. And with the right strategies in place, we were able to completely normalize their glucose responses before, during, and after exercise. So if you need some support to improve your diabetes management around exercise, then reach out to me after today's session. But parking exercise to one side, most people find it really difficult to achieve physical activity recommendations whilst juggling competing priorities of everyday life. Even if you do exercise, you probably spend too much time sitting down. Most of us have relatively sedentary office jobs that involve sitting behind a desk for most of the day, and then we come home, spend a few hours in front of the TV before going to sleep. Even professional footballers spend around about 80% of their time outside of training and matches being sedentary. So it is a major issue. It is a major problem. The reason it's a major problem is because sedentariness is associated with poorer health in a dose-dependent manner. So what do I actually mean by that? Well, here we've got some data to try and illustrate what I mean. Working from left to right, we've got the risk of any cardiovascular event, so such as heart attack, strokes, heart disease. We've got non-fatal cardiovascular events, so cardiovascular events that people don't die from, and then coronary heart disease. And the risk of each of these increases in a stepwise fashion with increasing amounts of TV viewing. And of course, it doesn't just need to be watching TV, just any type of activity where you're sitting down for prolonged periods of time. If you think about how long you sit down for uninterrupted, possibly in the evening or during the day, and for most people, it's at least 3 hours. So this is highlighted by these dashed lines. And sitting uninterrupted for these relatively short periods of time substantially increases health risks. This is in the general population. It's increased more so for people with their diabetes and type 1 diabetes. Now, even if you exercise on a weekend, spending prolonged periods of time sedentary during the week is still harmful. And actually, very recent research suggests that our weekend exercise, although really good for you, it might not be enough to counteract the negative impact of sedentariness, both on long-term risk and also day-to-day glucose control. Here we've got some data again to try and illustrate this point. So you can see that if you spend less than 5 hours a day sitting, then your risk of cardiovascular disease is lowered with the more exercise that you do. Okay, the more exercise being on the left-hand side of this figure. But if you spend more time sedentary, then your risk of cardiovascular disease increases even if you exercise. Now, this block represents achieving the recommended amount of physical activity, and you can see how the risk is higher for people doing even more exercise when the amount of time spent sitting down is high. Now, even in young, fit adults without type 1 diabetes, prolonged sitting time, it results in very dramatic increases in insulin resistance. So this is a kind of loss in sensitivity to the effects of insulin. Here we've got some data showing a 40% decrease in insulin sensitivity after only 1 day of inactivity. Now, within the context of type 1, this translates to around about a 40% increase in the amount of insulin needed to achieve similar glucose levels on inactive days as compared to days when prolonged sitting is reduced. And one of the reasons why this is particularly important, it's not just for day-to-day glucose levels, but it's a major pathological driver of long-term diabetes complications, independent to glucose control. So even if you've got good glucose management, you still face increased risk of small and large blood vessel disease if you have underlying insulin resistance. So the first kind of take-home message is irrespective of how much or how little exercise you do, reducing sedentariness is really important, both for day-to-day glucose and insulin management, and also reducing the risk of developing long-term complications. Now, all of that is on a bit of a sorry note. So what can we actually do to try and improve this? Well, here are some data from individuals with insulin resistance and pre-diabetes, so at risk of developing type 2 diabetes, not type 1. 45 minutes of continuous walking exercise significantly improves 24-hour glucose levels compared to the day before in which no exercise was performed. Okay, so you can see this here with the control condition in gray, the walking condition in black. Now, importantly, the timing of this seems to be important because this improvement in glucose control was seen when exercise was performed on a morning time, but not actually on an afternoon. But you don't need to do all of your exercise in one big chunk. Certainly if time is an issue, you can actually snack on exercise. So breaking large amounts of exercise up into smaller chunks throughout the day is also really effective. So here on the right side of the figure, we've got 3 15-minute chunks of exercise, each performed after breakfast, lunch and dinner. And this was equally as effective as improving 24-hour glucose levels as the 45-minute morning time exercise session. So spread exercise out during the day if time is an issue. Of course, it's not just 24-hour glucose, but we also want to look at mealtime glucose. A lot of people really struggle with glucose levels around meal times. So here's some data from exactly the same study that showed that the effects of performing this continuous big block of exercise versus activity snacking after meals on mealtime glucose levels. On the left, we have glucose levels 3 hours after lunch, and on the right, we've got glucose levels 3 hours after dinner. Now, I appreciate it's quite a lot of data, so let's just talk through this to kind of simplify matters. Firstly, we actually need to ignore the data in the middle of the left-hand figure. This is because lunch was, in this study, participants consumed lunch at about 12:30. Glucose levels were assessed 3 hours after lunch, meaning glucose levels were measured at about 3:30. But the afternoon exercise session was performed at 4:30. So obviously it wasn't really possible for this exercise bout to impact the 3-hour post-lunch glucose values. But what is interesting to note here, however, is the difference between glucose levels on the exercise day compared to the control day. The control day was the day before the exercise day. So what this difference actually represents is 2 consecutive days without any exercise, or 30 hours worth of sedentariness. And as you can see, this results in an increase in mealtime glucose levels. So kind of reiterating the point which I've made previously. Now, when looking at glucose levels at lunchtime, you can see that morning time exercise and exercise snacking are both effective. And here on the right, when we have a look at the impact of each exercise condition on glucose levels after dinner, well, what you'll notice is that if you perform exercise in the morning, this doesn't seem to impact glucose levels later in the day at dinner time. And exercise at lunch actually seemed to have a bit of a worsening effect on dinner time glucose levels in this study. However, if you snack on exercise throughout the day, then dinner time glucose levels are lower. So taking all of this together, it suggests a couple of things. Firstly, if lowering glucose around meal times is important, then performing exercise close to the meal time that you want to target is really important. So if you struggle with glucose levels at dinner, then exercise performed earlier in the day, it might not necessarily impact this as much as if you performed exercise after dinner. Secondly, a major benefit of accumulating activity rather than just doing one big block of it is that you can reduce postprandial hyperglycemia, so high glucose levels around meal times, for more than one meal, whereas a single bout of activity, it doesn't really seem to be as effective. Now here we have some data illustrating the impact of different types of activity performed 30 minutes before meal times. And importantly, again, this data is in people without diabetes, but with insulin resistance, so at risk of developing type 2, but not type 1. And the data I will present is the area under the curve. So rather than exact glucose levels, this represents the overall glucose exposure during a given period. The higher the value, the higher the glucose levels were over that period of time. The lower the values, well, then this represents a general glucose lowering effect. Now, if you compare the black bar to the white bar, the black bar represents 6 1-minute bouts of high-intensity walking activity, 30 minutes before activity for 30 minutes performed before breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So in total, around 18 individual minutes of walking at an intensity to get you breathless. So walking quickly or doing some stair climbs, and this is spread out across the day. And as you can see, this approach generally results in a much lower glucose level at dinner time than simply performing one big block of continuous exercise. It also doesn't necessarily matter if you change the type of activity. So it doesn't have to be walking. In grey, we've got a condition in which the 6-minute bouts were a mixture of high-intensity walking and resistance-based activities. So for people that are not very active, this could be something like putting a load of washing in the drum or putting shopping away, good for working at home. So you can mix this up. It doesn't necessarily just have to be walking. It's just about becoming more active. But glucose control across the whole day is important. It's not just at meal times. And this data shows the change in glucose levels across the day with each type of activity. In red, we have the glucose trace for performing 30 minutes of continuous moderate intensity walking activity at dinner time. Obviously, this doesn't impact glucose levels during the morning and afternoon periods, but you can see how this reduces glucose levels quite effectively on an evening time. If you compare this to 6 1-minute bouts of high-intensity walking activity performed 30 minutes before breakfast, lunch, and dinner, well, this resulted in an overall glucose lowering across the whole of the day. And a similar response was seen when that exercise modality was changed. So changing this to walking and resistance-based exercise. So snacking on exercise or light intensity activities are really time efficient and effective alternative to more traditional types of continuous exercise that take up big blocks of time. And these types of strategies are particularly useful for those who want to exercise, but currently struggle to fit it into their schedule. But you remember me saying it's not just about exercise, it's also about reducing general sedentariness. So this data is in people from with type 2 diabetes who sat uninterrupted for 7 hours. So sitting behind your desk at work all morning and afternoon. And here you can see the glucose data, the glucose levels are quite high around meal times, with the cutlery indicating breakfast and lunchtime periods. Now, if you compare this, if you compare the black trace to the red trace, well, on a separate occasion, the same participants sat again for 7 hours, but they broke up sitting time with 3-minute bouts of very light intensity walking every 30 minutes. So, think of this as simply getting out of your chair, taking a short break from work to put the kettle on and move around the office. And you can see that in people with type 2, this really simple, easy to do strategy effectively reduces glucose levels after and also between meals. To put this into perspective, the glucose lowering that we see here, if you perform this daily, would reduce HbA1c by about 1% or 11 millimoles per mole. And every 1% reduction in HbA1c corresponds to around a 37% reduced risk of microvascular complications. So really impactful, not only for day-to-day glucose levels, but also potentially long-term diabetes management. And you see comparable results if the walking activity is replaced by simple resistance exercise as well. Now, of course, all of this is being done in people with either without diabetes or people with type 2. Of course, we're interested in people with type 1. So recently, we had received funding from Diabetes UK to answer this question. We implemented exactly the same strategy as what I've just shown you. So breaking up sedentary time with frequent, really light walking exercises, only 3-minute bouts. And here we've got the glucose trace during a morning through the morning and afternoon laboratory visit in people with type 1. So the red trace represents 7 hours of uninterrupted sitting. Now, if you compare this to the black trace, this represents interrupted sitting with 3-minute bouts of the light intensity walking every 30 minutes. And you can see that glucose levels are on average significantly lower. We then continue to monitor people later on in the day. And again, compare the red trace to the intervention. And again, you can see quite a significant glucose lowering over the next kind of 2 days, 48 hours. But of course, these are average responses for the group. So let's take a look at some individual cases. Here we've got participant number 7, So on the left, we've got their glucose responses in the lab, and on the right, we have their glucose responses for the 48 hours after leaving the lab. Compare this to the interrupted sitting arm, and then simply breaking up sitting time over the course of a single morning and afternoon results in significantly improved glucose levels, both during the lab and for the next 48 hours. And if we look at some of their CGM data, so this is their time and range data. So with uninterrupted sitting, for participant 7 at least, roughly an equal amount of time above, they spend roughly an equally amount of time above range as they did in range. So about a 50-50 split. And if you compare this to after the intervention, actually they spent 100% of their time in range over that kind of 2.5-day period. So really, really effective for this individual. Of course, this is just one participant, and what you will see is individual responses, and these are the individual responses. So where you see bars shooting up into the sky, this represents an improvement in time and range, whereas where the bars fall below, this indicates a worsening in time and range. Not everybody improved the time and range. Here, the opposite is true. So bars that move below indicate an improvement in time above range, whereas the opposite is true. And again, you will see that not everybody was able to improve. And the same is true for time below range as well. So some people did encounter an increased risk of hypoglycemia. So generally, we see an overall improvement, but there are some individual differences. So just to kind of summarize from this talk, prolonged periods of sitting and inactivity are really bad for our health, day-to-day glucose control, and also they increase the risk of developing or progressing diabetes complications. Exercise is really great. It's really good for our health, even in small amounts. And some exercise is certainly better than none. But exercise alone is certainly unlikely to negate the negative health impacts of increased sedentariness. Breaking up or interrupting prolonged periods of sitting or inactivity with exercise snacks is a really time-efficient and effective method of incorporating exercise into the day. But actually, small amounts of light-intensity activity spread across the day improves glucose levels in people with type 1 diabetes. And this can be specifically targeted around mealtimes if mealtime glucose control is the target. So that concludes my talk. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for that, Matt, and really great insight into how everyday movement and physical activity impacts on our condition, as well as us just as human beings. I think now, after hearing you talk, I'm going to be going out looking for a standing desk. I think that's the only way forward now. So yeah, brilliant insight as always, Matt. Thank you so much for sparing the time to come and speak to us today. There might be some questions for you in the chat, so if you don't mind hanging around even just for a few minutes, just to see if there's anything that you can support with others that might be asking questions off the back of your talk. But thank you so much. We're now going to move into the area of structured sport and exercise. So we're going to take what Matt's been talking about there, and we're going to go and delve into the next step up, if you like, where it becomes maybe a little bit more serious, a little bit more regular in terms of exercising with type 1 diabetes. And I'm going to hand over to a couple of experts from EXTOD, who I have the pleasure of knowing quite well and have worked with on various different things over a few years. So firstly, just to introduce Professor Rob Andrews, who works at the University of Exeter and is an honorary consultant physician at Musgrove Park Hospital in Taunton, and also is the co-founder of EXTOD. And to Anne-Marie Frohock, who is the lead paediatric diabetes dietitian with the Oxfordshire Children's Diabetes team, and also works very hard on EXTOD too. So thank you both for joining us and giving up your Saturday morning to spare us and provide us with some amazing knowledge, which I know you provide. And over to both of you.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. I'm going to start by sharing the screen. Hopefully this will all work. Can we see that?
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah. Right. First technological hurdle is over. So good morning, everybody. I'm Anne-Marie Frohock. and I'm here with Rob Andrews.
Hiya.
And today we're going to be talking about physical activity in type 1 diabetes using the EXTOD principles. So over to you, Rob.
So what we're hoping to do just over the next sort of 20 to 25 minutes is just to answer 5 common questions. And we're sorry we can't go into more details. So, and we're going to do a double act here. So I'm going to start by doing the first question, which is how do different exercises affect glucose and why? So if we can move to the next slide. Yeah, so this is a really important thing to understand for people with type 1 diabetes, and can be quite confusing that sometimes they do exercise and blood sugars go up, sometimes they do it and it goes down, and other times it doesn't change at all. So just to go over that, so what we've sort of done on our course is use something called the rule of threes, and what we say is there are 3 different types of exercise. So this is the first type of exercise, which is flexibility, and we've given a couple of examples here, so Tai Chi, yoga, Pilates, as things that are there to just improve how flexible you are, but also coordination. And what we know with these is that when you first start to exercise with these, is what will happen is that your blood sugar levels will start to fall, and the liver will respond, and that by producing a bit of glucagon, which is a hormone that comes from the liver, which will cause your pancreas, which will cause your liver to produce glucose. How much the glucose goes up will depend on how much insulin is around, but on the whole, the liver will be able to produce enough glucose to match what's being used in the muscles. And that will mean that across this exercise, that on the whole, there'll be no change in the glucose levels. So the glucose will remain normal. The second form of exercise is aerobic exercise. And that's the one that most of us do, which is thinking about either walks, running, cycling, or swimming. And this is done to obviously get you fitter. And again, if we go back to that little caricature that we had, so this is seen as a bit more of a stress by the body. So what will happen is the pancreas will produce glucagon when you start doing this. The adrenaline will start to produce also some stress hormones. And again, what the liver can produce will depend on how much insulin is around. So if there's lots and lots of insulin around, then the liver might struggle to produce enough glucose. But you'll produce some from the liver. And on the whole, because of the fact that you've taken on board insulin, you probably won't produce enough to cover that exercise. So on the whole, for most aerobic exercise, you'll see a slight drop, and that drop can be more if you're doing it at the times when there's a lot of insulin around. So on the whole, with aerobic exercise, the glucose levels will drop. Then finally, if we look at the anaerobic exercise, so this is the power exercise, this is the sprints, and it can be sometimes quite surprising what we call as anaerobic exercises. So fencing, for instance, is an anaerobic exercise. You might not see it as that. And these, if you go back to that caricature, are seen as much more stressful. So the glucose in the muscle get used fairly quickly, then there'll be a real stressful response from the adrenaline gland, and you'll have that glucagon that goes up. And really, irrespective of how much insulin you've taken, the stress hormones are so high that you'll produce a large amount of glucose. And actually, these exercises don't use very much glucose. So on the whole, there'll be a misbalance that you're producing much more than you're using. So the glucose levels will go high. And this can be quite surprising, but that's what happens in people without type 1 diabetes. But as soon as our levels go up, we produce more insulin to bring it down again. So what we're really saying is that for these 3 exercises, you're going to get a different response. So for the flexibility exercise, it's going to stay much the same. For the aerobic exercise, it's likely to fall, and it will fall much quicker if you're doing it round your fast-acting insulin, such as meal times. For the aerobic exercise, you might see the glucose go up. And then for those exercises that a lot of us do, which is kind of the mixed exercise, going to the gym or playing football or doing other kind of team sports, it's a mixture of these 2. And whether it goes up or down or stays the same will depend on what that mixture is. So that can be a bit confusing. So if you're in a team sport and you're having to work very, very hard and having to cover a lot of distance, then you can find that the glucose falls. If you're playing a team that actually is quite easy and not having to do very much of that and just having to do a few sprints, then the glucose might go up. So team sports are a bit more difficult. So I'll hand over to Anne-Marie, who will take you through the next question.
Thanks, Rob. So the next question to think about is, now we can see what potentially may happen to blood glucose levels during exercise. what should the glucose target for exercise be? And bearing in mind that different responses are likely, we usually recommend that you have a slightly higher blood glucose level to start exercise than you would do for your pre-meal targets. So for example, if your usual target is between 4 and 7, that can be elevated to be anything between 7 to 15 before you start exercise. Now, the reasons that we say this is that it gives you some scope for the blood glucose level to fall, particularly around those aerobic type exercises that often we do. And we know that the muscles perform better, recover better within these blood glucose levels. If the glucose levels go too high, then muscle function is affected, coordination is affected. So if you're doing team sports needing that fast reaction, then that's blunted with a high blood glucose level. And often people that I see in sports clinics say it feels like I'm running through treacle when I've got a really high blood glucose level. So this nice little flow chart here, which will be available to you afterwards, just gives you a little idea about how we can achieve that blood glucose level at the start of exercise. And it does require carbohydrates because that gives you the most rapid response to change that blood glucose level. And we're talking about fast acting carbs here. So your glucose, dextrose tablets, things like that. And what you can see is if you check your blood glucose level before, and you're below that 4 to 15 target, then an additional carbohydrate snack is required without exercise. What to do if you've got a high blood glucose level? Well, first of all, this depends on what type of exercise you're going to be doing. And if it's that anaerobic type exercise that potentially is going to put up your blood glucose level, then you may want to think about taking some intervention to bring it down before you start. And we're going to cover that a little bit in a moment. But with any blood glucose level over 15, you should be checking for ketones or using the level that you have set by your local healthcare provider, which may be different if you're in a pediatric clinic or a young adult clinic. And again, the presence of any ketones is a real no-no for exercise. And really, this is the only time where we would say avoid exercising is when you have high blood ketones. So you should be following your own correction guidelines for those. If you have ketones below 1.5 or below the threshold that you would usually treat them with insulin, we recommend giving a little bit of insulin, maybe a third of your correction dose to bring them back down before you start. The other time that you may need to think about starting exercise is if you've had a severe hypo in the last 24 hours that's needed assistance, then your stores of glucose within the body are going to be lower than they potentially should be. So it may be wise to reconsider starting exercise on those days. If you've had any hypo in the last 24 hours, then know that your risk of hypo or the blood glucose level dropping into a hypo during exercise is higher. So you may need to take extra precautions. So let's just think about the use of CGM or flash glucose monitoring around exercise. An increasing number of people are using glucose sensing as a means of monitoring blood glucose level. And these can be super, super useful around exercise because we have the addition of the trend arrows, which we can use to help inform our carbohydrate interventions to achieve target blood glucose levels before and during exercise. So you can use those trend arrows to add a third dimension to your blood glucose reading. And if they're on the way up, then you may need to reconsider whether or not you need carbohydrate. And if they're on the way down, you may need to think about having a little bit more. And the amounts, more or less, that you might want to try are shown in this table here. These are just starting places. So work with your providers or on your own and just see if they work or if they don't and tweak them from there. So one last thing just to mention on this slide is if you are a little bit hypo unaware and you're not using a system with alarms and alerts on it, it may be that you would you choose a slightly higher starting target of between 9 and 12 millimoles per litre. One thing just to mention about use of CGM around exercise is just to be aware that at times of rapid blood glucose levels changing, there can be a higher discrepancy between blood glucose readings and sensor readings. And this is a really nice analogy using the train here. So your blood glucose is at the carriage at the front, and then your sensor glucose is lagging behind. So when it's going down a steep hill or up a steep hill, then your sensor is going to be a little bit behind what your blood glucose reading is doing. With that in mind, it may be that actually you choose to use slightly different alarms and alert settings if you have them enabled on, and you're able to adjust them on your sensor so that you get alerts at a higher level to allow you to take intervention sooner to avoid highs or lows during exercise. The accuracy of sensors is reasonable during exercise, but there are things that can compound that. So just keep an eye on how accurate you feel your sensor is during exercise. And again, it depends on the accuracy of that sensor for you at the beginning, at all other times as well. So I'm going to hand back to Rob now, just thinking about how we can achieve that blood glucose target during exercise.
All right, great. Yeah, so we're now going to go through how to control during exercise. And it's as I said, we have this course called EXTOD education that we've divided into using what we call the rules of three. So there are 3 ways that you can control your glucose during exercise, and we get people to think of that as ICE. So ICE prevents injuries, so prevents problems during exercise. So the first I of the ICE is insulin changes, the second is carbohydrate, and the third is exercise. So I'm just going to talk about insulin, and then Anne-Marie will talk about carbohydrates. I don't know if we can go to the next slide. So what we know is that, particularly around meal times are when you have the highest glucose levels. So when your insulin levels, when your insulin levels are high, that actually prevents the liver working properly and actually enabling you to produce glucose when you exercise. So what that means is if you are going to exercise within the window of your fast-acting insulin, which is 2 to 2.5 hours for most people who are on the very fast actings now, Novo Rapid and things like that, then you're going to have to think about whether you might have to make changes to your insulin. If you do make changes to your insulin, so reduce the dose that you go with the mealtime, that will mean that some of the food that you've taken will be available to be used by the exercise because it won't be taken up because of the stimulation of the insulin, but it will also mean there's less insulin around to inhibit your liver working. So what we say as a simple rule is if you're going to exercise within 2 hours of the meal and you know you're going to do that, then we suggest that a starting point, and this comes from lots of research that people have put people into the lab, that we start with a 50% reduction. And you get the most benefit from that when the peak's the highest in terms of the insulin, which means that if you start the exercise within 45 minutes of eating, you'll get the most benefit from that insulin reduction. It's absolutely no help to you, as you can see by the kind of dotted lines, that after 3 hours, the dotted line is the same as the straight line, that reducing your fast-acting insulin at a meal time for exercise you're going to do 3 hours later isn't going to be helpful. So we only say that you should do this if you're going to start the exercise within 2 hours of a meal. That can work for both pumps, and it can work for people who are taking insulin through injections. What do you do between meals? Well, between meals, if you're on insulin injections, unless you're in talking with your clinical team of things, we wouldn't suggest changing background insulins if you're on the multiple daily injections. But if you are on a pump, then what you can do is you can go for a temporary rate. And the 2 ways of doing that temporary rate are one, that you just take the pump off. But the difficulty with taking the pump off or switching it down to off is that actually it takes a little while for your insulin levels to drop, and generally takes about 90 minutes to 2 hours to really drop significantly to affect your glucose dropping with exercise. So you'll get a bit of benefit, but you're not going to get a huge amount of benefit from doing that. But if you can, and you know you're going to exercise before, you know what time you're going to exercise, if you can switch that pump to a 50% reduction 90 minutes before, then you will limit the fall in the actual glucose that happens with exercise. So if you know you're going to exercise in 90 minutes, then you go to the 50% reduction. So if you go to the next slide. So really, if you our exercise between meals, then we say start with a 50% reduction in basal rates from 90 minutes before to the finish of exercise. If you just start, then it's still worth either taking it off or reducing it down to sort of 95% as soon as you start to exercise. You will get some benefit. So I'll hand over to Anne-Marie, who's going to do the carbohydrate bit.
Or just one last thing on the insulin is if you are using hybrid closed loop systems, which some people are now having access to, all of them have an exercise or an activity mode that will raise the glucose target and reduce the basal insulin delivery. But as we found, as Rob told us about the basal reductions, in order to get the benefit of this, you do need to start it in advance of that exercise. So again, about 90 minutes before. If that's not working to prevent low blood glucose levels or keep you within that target of 5 to 10 during exercise, there is some benefit on these systems to reduce the bolus for the meal before, particularly if you're exercising within 2 hours of eating, but you wouldn't want to reduce it by quite as much as you would on a standard pump or on injections. So we suggest starting between about 20 to 30% off of that bolus for that meal with hybrid closed loop systems. Okay, so carbohydrates, as I mentioned, when we're thinking about achieving that target blood glucose level before exercise, can be really good for having a quick fix to a lower or a reducing blood glucose level, and can also be useful kind of for fueling exercise as well. So some athletes prefer to have slightly higher blood glucose levels during their activity to allow them to take on extra carbohydrate as fuel. The best way to deliver that carbohydrate in order to keep your blood glucose levels between the target that we're hoping for is, rather than having it all in one go at the beginning of exercise, which can cause a big spike in your blood glucose level, actually to have it in smaller amounts regularly throughout. So we tend to say every 20 to 30 minutes. And when you're thinking about how much blood glucose level would be used, how much glucose or carbohydrates that you need for fueling during exercise, we recommend starting with a simple calculation of using 0.5 gram of carbs per kilo per hour of exercise that you do. Now, if you are having a snack before exercise without insulin, then that can be of kind of like a medium to slower release carbohydrates, and that can actually cover you for up to half an hour to an hour of average intensity, moderate intensity activity. If you are then exercising for a bit longer and the demands on glucose for fuel go up, actually you're going to need to have some extra fuel as you proceed with that exercise, and that's where these small little snacks of fast acting glucose come in. So this is a time perhaps to reach for the jelly babies or dried fruit to keep the blood glucose levels up. And some people do choose to use dextrose tablets or glucose sports drinks to provide that. If you're on a hybrid closed loop system, then you may still, despite using the activity mode and reducing pre-meal boluses, you may still experience a blood glucose falling. And so in this instance, using the fast-acting carbohydrates as fuel is really, really useful, and one of the only strategies we have. Worth starting with half what you would usually expect, so about 0.25 grams of carbs per kilo per hour. And you can adapt that based on the arrows on your CGM trend as well. So you may have them sooner or later, depending on the arrows, and more and less, again, depending on where your blood glucose levels are. So little and often, every 15-20 minutes would be really good for that system.
So
back to Rob.
Finally, just to finish up, and this is a really peculiar thing that people sometimes don't hear, is that you can use the exercise to manage your glucose. So this is one way of kind of that exercise can be used. So most people who exercise, who are adults and not children, tend to go to a gym, and they tend to do a mixture of aerobic and anaerobic exercise. So what you can do is you can use that exercise order to help control your glucose. So if you turn up at the gym and the glucose is very high, then you can decide to do the exercise that will cause the glucose to go down, which is shown in this order 1. So if you turned up and the glucose was quite high, you could do your aerobic first, and that would cause the glucose to fall. And then you could finish up by doing an anaerobic exercise, which would bring the glucose back up. And that way you might be able to avoid having to take carbohydrate, and you might avoid the glucose going low. Likewise, if you turned up and the glucose was quite low at the start, rather than taking carbohydrate, you could think about doing the anaerobic exercise first, and actually then do that first. That will cause the glucose to go up, and then to mean that you don't finish up with a high glucose, then you would finish up by doing your aerobic exercise. The other way that can be helpful is what we call sprints. These can be really helpful for children. So sometimes when I'm talking to how do you manage a PE class and things, then one way I do work with them, it'd be interesting if Anne-Marie does it, is just say to the teachers, is there any way that at the start the whole class could just do a sprint? It means you're not singling out someone if they've got type 1 diabetes, but that sprint, doing a couple of sprints at the start of the class, will prop up the blood sugar for about 30 to 40 minutes. And that can be done regularly if people are doing long events. So I have some people who do ultra marathons that they basically sprint every 30 minutes within the ultra marathon just to keep their blood sugar up. What you have to remember is that what you're in effect doing with this is taking the risk away from going low during exercise and moving that to after exercise. It's a bit like paying on your credit card. Is that the body's providing you the loan of the glucose, and you're going to have to pay that credit card or the body back later on. So it's really important, if you use this mechanism, that you really make sure that you get all of the food, which we're just about to talk to, and things right after exercise. But this can be a really useful way of managing glucose for some people who don't want to take carbohydrates and haven't had a chance to change their insulin.
Absolutely, and really useful for those who are exercising for weight management actually as well, where they don't want to have on extra carbohydrates.
So we're now going to move on to how do I control after. And again, there's the same rules. So you can make changes to insulin, carbohydrate, and exercise. And again, I'll just mention about the insulin and then hand over to carbohydrate. As you see, I don't know very much about food. So Matt really lovely showed that actually just a small amount of exercise can really affect your insulin sensitivity and have an effect. And one thing that's worth thinking about, just to simplify after exercise, is whether you could try and do some form of exercise every day. And then what will happen is that insulin sensitivity will be around all the time. I think what people with diabetes struggle about is if they do a day of exercise and then have a couple of days off and then do a day of exercise, is what they have to manage is that getting more sensitive and then finding that they become unsensitive, and they're kind of guessing for both of those. How do I manage the getting sensitive? And then at what time point does that sensitivity go? But what we know roughly, and I'm very sorry, I'm a very simplistic man, but what we know from kind of studies, if you kind of amalgamate them, is that roughly the amount of insulin that you would need to take for a meal drops by about 50%, and the amount of background insulin that you need to change reduces by about 20%. So what we kind of say after exercise, which is the next slide, is that a rule after exercise, if you're not doing it regularly, and it's really important as we're saying you're not doing this regularly, because if you're doing it regularly, you don't need to make these adaptations. But if you're a kind of weekend warrior that you go off and do some exercise, or you have a child that does it only a couple of times a week, then this is what we have the 50-50-20 rule, is it's a 50% reduction of the normal bolus for 2 meals after exercise. And what I mean by exercise here really is something longer than 45 minutes. I don't mean you have to do this for every form of exercise. And so it's a prolonged bout of exercise, a 50% reduction in what you would normally do with the corrections. And if you've done an exercise after 4 p.m., it's more than 2 hours, it's a very high intensity exercise, or it's a new exercise you've never done before, then we would say have a go at just reducing your background by 20%, just to be safe overnight, to make sure you don't have a hypoglycemia. And then, of course, with all of these rules we're talking about, go back, look at what happened, make an adaptation, have a discussion with your team and say, oh, how can I tweak this?
Great. And food also comes into that time period after exercise for refueling, and we can think about food as being kind of recovery food in this period as well. So this is particularly relevant, as Rob has mentioned, that if you've done a prolonged amount of exercise or a short amount of high intensity exercise, actually you do need to think about refueling, and that can help stabilize blood glucose levels afterwards. And one of the difficulties that often people mention is in the maybe 2 to 6 hours afterwards that their blood glucose levels drop. So one of the ways to help deal with this, as well as doing the insulin reductions that Rob's mentioned, is to think about what you're eating at that time. And it's really important to replace the carbohydrate fuel that's been lost, and also to make sure that there's appropriate protein in that meal as well. And the protein is used to replenish the muscles, to help them recover, and also has a glycemic effect about 6 hours after we've eaten it. So at that time where we're still a little bit insulin sensitive, perhaps we haven't, we've got background insulin on board, that might be slightly too much considering of the insulin sensitivity hangover from exercise, the protein will kick in at that time as well. So examples that we often talk about are things like a ham sandwich or peanut butter on toast, a simple milkshake or a glass of milk, cereal and milk. Often some of the youngsters I work with take the protein yogurt sachets and things like that because they're quick and easy. And you want to get this on board within about an hour. So we have this golden hour after exercise for the initial time where we refuel. May coincide with a meal where you can reduce the insulin, or it may just be an extra snack. And what we would generally say is about 15 grams of that snack can go without insulin or be uncovered. If it's more than that, then you'll need to give insulin, but again, 50% of what you would usually give at that time. The other thing that is often a common complaint after exercise, and I did notice this in the chat, that blood glucose levels can go high immediately afterwards. And there's a number of reasons for this. One of them is hydration levels. So the more dehydrated you are, the higher blood glucose concentration will be. So rehydration and habitual hydration are all times around exercise, particularly for those that are exercising more regularly, can be a really useful strategy to help stabilize blood glucose levels and help bring them down afterwards if you've been doing particularly high intensity sweaty exercise. Rehydration salts can be quite useful in really hot weather, but generally aren't necessarily needed unless you're doing prolonged amounts of exercise. The other reasons to think about high blood glucose levels afterwards are thinking about whether or not you've overfueled, your fueling strategies have just overdone it. Maybe you don't need quite as much. And there can also be a natural rise in blood glucose levels afterwards as the body is still staying in its kind of release of stores mode while the muscles have stopped using that energy. So that's where using exercise again can be quite useful. So including a really good warm down, cool down in any kind of exercise program can also help with that as well. So that's another kind of tool in your toolbox of exercise strategies that you can find. And when you think about cool down, you're thinking about 15-20 minutes of gentle, low intensity walking, stretching, things like that. This is Rob's slide. So yes, so we want to recheck glucose. So, so you go on, I'll let you talk about this, Rob.
I think you've kind of said that, so we need to reiterate. I think we're just running out of a bit of time, so we'll just kind of probably overnight there are strategies that can be used, but we'll let you have these slides just to finish up with just where you can get further information. So further information, I think it's been in the chat loads and loads of time. Really discuss this with your diabetes team and things. They'll be able to help you with all this. There are some websites. So we have a website called EXTOD where you can get information. And if you're interested in being involved in research, you can also get information there. A very good site called RunSuite. And then we are hoping to run some sports weekends where we take people through how to manage their exercise. But also they get to do some sport. We run a patient conference generally once a year, but that got interrupted by COVID, although we did do it virtual, so that will be coming up and all that will come on the website. And then, as I mentioned, there is this EXTOD program that's a 3 half-day course that people can actually attend that trusts are now starting to get hold of and getting trained in. And if I can answer any kind of questions, feel free to email me. So thanks for your time. I'm sorry if you're slightly over. Yeah, that's the website there if people want to look.
Brilliant. Thank you both for giving us some incredible insight there around physical activity and exercise for type 1. Personally, I know how much it's impacted on me, and hopefully what you've just shared there is going to impact on so many people that have joined us this morning to hear from you both as well. So really, really big thank you from us all at JDRF for sparing us the time to come and give us that presentation. So we're now going to move on to a presentation from one of our sponsors and one of our supporters for the event today. So if I just want to welcome Claire from Medtrum.
Hi everyone. Hi, I'm going to give you a quick whistle-stop tour of the Medtrum Nano pump and CGM. So I'll just bring my slides up. This works. There we go. So effectively we've got the Nano pump and CGM. It's a tubeless patch pump. And I work for Medtrum. Our goal is really to make diabetes a smaller and simpler part of your life effectively. So what we have, this is a tubeless patch pump. It's the first tubeless pump that has an element of hybrid closed loop. So it's got a semi-closed loop functionality if used with our Nano CGM. Both of these systems can be used totally independently of one another with other systems, so the Nano pump can be used with other CGMs, but when you use them together, that's when you get the semi-closed loop. What that means is the basal rate can automatically be stopped by the pump if it detects sugars are going too low, and then automatically resumes when sugars are safe again. We're working on the full hybrid closed loop. We're expecting launch next year sometime, and hopefully that will just be rolled out to all of our users with training when it's available. We have smartphone control, which is available both Android and with Apple products, again giving greater discretion when youngsters are using the pump, and again it's less for them to carry, lose, break. So again, you know, they've got the controller there all the time. It's a really simple, easy system to use as well. So giving a bolus is as simple as sending a text message. The pump's very small, as you can see here against this 50p piece. Effectively, it's a 3-day wear pump. It's very small, so there's less wastage. And the maximum units is 200 units for the reservoir. As I say, can use with other CGMs, but we do have our own CGM that gives you that predictive low suspend. That's a 14-day wear sensor. It's calibration, so it's basically auto-calibrated. And again, it's a rechargeable transmitter. But any questions or for more information, go to medtrum.co.uk, where you can also request a demo pump to try out size. And again, any questions, please feel free to put in the Q&A section. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Claire, and thank you, Medtrum, for all of the support. We're now going to move on to another presentation from one of our sponsors of the event today. So, Camille from Insulet.
Hiya. Thank you. I'll just do a screen share. So my name's Camille Warren. I'm one of the clinical services managers for Insulet. I cover London, and I'm just going to go through a few slides just to introduce you to the Omnipod Dash system. So if I can, there we go. Okay, so the Omnipod Dash is a 2-part system, and what you're looking at is the pod part, which you wear on the body continuously for a 3-day period. So it's small and lightweight, it's waterproof. The cannula insertion is fully automated, and it can take up to 200 units of insulin over a 3-day period. You have continuous insulin delivery, so there's no need to disconnect during that time. It connects with the PDM, which I'll show you shortly, via Bluetooth technology. So this is the PDM, or the Personal Diabetes Manager. Essentially, it's a lockdown smartphone type of device, so it's very easy and intuitive to use. Most of us are familiar with smartphone tech. So it's a lot of tapping and scrolling and swiping, essentially, to navigate through the menus. It has a 0 basal rate functionality, so it's really, really useful for people that might need a little bit more sensitivity around their insulin requirements. And you can do fractional carb ratios as well. So if you need a bit more sensitivity around carb ratios, you need to adjust that throughout the day, you can do that on this system. It also has a pod site tracker, so if you need to keep an eye on where your site rotating to, that can be really helpful just to keep track of that. And as I mentioned, it's a very easy to use, modern smartphone-based design. It's locked down, so once it's connected up to your pod, it's a locked-in system, so there's no risk of your Omnipod being picked up by other systems. Okay. If you have more questions, you can access Omnipod specialists on this number, on the 0800 number on the right, anytime, and they can go through any questions you might have about the system or any local concerns or issues you might have around access and funding. You can speak to them directly, and they're really, really helpful. We also have extra support as part of the package that we offer. So you can access a free sample pod without the cannula, just to get an idea of how it feels and where in different parts of the body. We do full training, so that's part of what I do. We can do virtual, we can do face-to-face training with the teams that we support around the country. We have online options for training as well. We do holiday loaner if you want to borrow spare PDM. We do pod disposal scheme as well. So if you want to send pods back to us, so that's all free and part of the service that we offer. Okay, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Camille, and all the support that you give us as well from Insulet's perspective. It's now time for our first comfort break of the day. So we are running a little bit behind schedule. So if you wouldn't mind being back with us for 11:15. And in the meantime, check out the slides which we'll be holding during the break, as there might be some opportunities on there for you to get involved with some of the work we're doing at JDRF at the moment. So meet us back here at 11:15, go and grab a cuppa and a quick refreshment, and we'll see you again then. Welcome back, everyone, and I hope you managed to grab a quick drink and a refreshment. We're now going to move on to a presentation from Richard, Paul and Lewis from Dexcom.
Hi guys, just wanted to say a quick hi. My name's Paul. I'm on the inside sales team at Dexcom. We are just going to play you a video briefly, but just wanted to introduce ourselves before we do that.
Yeah, hi, my name's Richard. I'm part of the customer support team. Happy to answer any questions for you.
Hi everyone, I'm Lewis. I'm a territory sales manager at Dexcom, and also happy to answer any questions. Hope you enjoy the video.
Thanks all for jumping on there, and thank you for the video as well and the support from Dexcom. We're now going to move on to our next speaker, who is Nusrat Kausar. So Nusrat is a registered dietitian, the clinical director of Primary Care Dietitians, a newly launched company where she supports dietitians working in different primary care networks across England. Nusrat also has a really special interest in working with athletes with type 1 diabetes, and she's the co-chair and founder of the British Dietetic Association's Sport and Exercise Diabetes subgroup. So Nusrat, I'm hoping you're going to tell me all about what I need to know around the choices I need to make as an athlete with type 1 about what I put into my mouth. So I'm hoping that many people are going to get a lot from what you're going to discuss. But thank you so much for giving up your time. I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
Oh, thank you for the invite. So yeah, thank you. It will be a whistle-stop tour, so please don't think you're going to be a massive expert at the end of these 20 minutes. So here we go. So I think initially the key thing is to think about healthy eating and the basics of healthy eating, and it's always worth thinking about sports nutrition as like a pyramid effect in my sort of visual head, and getting the baseline right. So from a healthy eating point of view, for sports and athletes, you probably need a little bit more than the average portion size of foods compared to what the general public would need. And again, you know, there's a range of if you're starting out versus if you're at the elite end, but you genuinely will need a bit more if you're doing a bit more activity. So usually with carbohydrates, you're looking to have about 4 to 6 portions, with the protein, about 2 to 4 portions a day. And then your vitamins and minerals from fruit and vegetables, getting a wide variety of those, so quite a high amount there, 5 to 9 portions, so more than the 5 a day. And you want to be definitely getting in your fluids for rehydration. And you know, we've all talked about replenishing, repair already, and rehydrating and things, so it's really important. And then sort of a couple of portions of fat for the day. So it's really important to sort of thinking about your diet and plan whether you're having these foods in your day, and if these are at each meal. Ideally, as an athlete, you probably want to have some carbohydrates, protein, and some sort of fiber and some vitamins and minerals at each meal, because otherwise you will struggle to get enough protein in. And a couple of snacks a day is probably really important. From a vegetarian point of view, there are other options. You'll be focusing more on the vegan, from a vegan vegetarian point of view, you'll be focusing more on the lentils, beans, pulses, tofu, that sort of thing. So, you know, it's not that you can't achieve nutrition, adequate protein throughout the day, but I'll go through that hopefully a little bit more. So not all carbohydrates are created equal, which I'm sure as type 1s, you know, you've had lots of fun with trying to deal with food and sugars and insulin, so lots to deal with. However, a key sort of understanding part of carbohydrates is about glycemic index. So that's how quickly foods are absorbed into the bloodstream and then used by the body and sort of into the blood. So bread or, you know, various different foods will break down differently depending on the molecules or how structured something is, how much gelatinous fluids, you know, from a chemical point of view, how they break down. So high GI foods will release quickly, so put your sugars up a little bit quicker. Low GI foods will release a lot slower, so sort of not raise your sugars much. That's important in sports because you probably will need a combination of the two. So it's good to understand and have a good understanding. And if you're not aware of these sorts of things, to look up a bit more about the glycemic index, because if you're, depending on pre, post, during, you may differ the types of GI foods you've had. So I think already Robin and Anne-Marie have already sort of talked about, you know, jelly babies and things like that, which are quite high GI. But there's other low GI options. So I've just listed a few here, and my slides obviously will be available, so do have a look. But generally, you know, most fruits that are acidic tend to be lower GI, and they should be definitely included sort of in that pre-meal phase if you want. Things like fresh vegetables, most vegetables tend to be low GI. Potatoes, I normally count in the carbohydrate section, so it's not low GI usually, but other potatoes like sweet potatoes, yam, things like that are. Breads and cereals and things like that, when you think about whole grains, grains, thinking about more about whole grain and having seeds and things like that in there, a lot lower GI. Your cereals, things like your large oats and porridge and things like that, muesli, oats, rye, and high bran cereals tend to be lower GI. I know cereals are a big debate. Often they are quite high GI for most people, and if you're eating them in the morning, often they do cause spikes. So you know, for some of you it'll be different, but generally they are lower GI, and then you can make them lower GI. And so all food can be made lower GI by adding either more protein to it, adding a little bit of healthy fat to it, and adding some dairy to it, and that will stay in the stomach a bit longer. Things like lentils, chickpeas, white rice, but basmati white rice and whole grain pastas and things like that tend to be low GI. And yeah, things like nuts and seeds, and then sort of meat, chicken, fish, and things like that don't actually have any carbs in, so they're all sort of low GI. So yeah, so those are sorts of general low GI foods, and then sort of opposites will be high GI. So your breads that are white breads or foods that don't have as much fiber in would be sort of that higher end. And for fruits and things like that, usually the tropical fruits that tend to be a bit higher GI. So in terms of thinking about, I'm going to just break it down to carbs, protein, and sort of different fluids, because that's what we usually think about for sports and exercise. So carbohydrates are really important in sports, and you do need those at various points in the day. And I think before, during, and after is a really, really good way of thinking about carbohydrates, because if you are an athlete and you're training regularly, you're always going to be need, at some point, there'll always be before, during, after. And if you're not getting those foods and carbohydrates, protein and fluids in at those before, during, after, you're probably not using the best time for making sure you're getting enough nutrients that you need. So generally before exercise, for carbohydrates, the aim will be to try and eat at least 2 to 4 hours before, just to sort of stabilize, and that will be sort of a low GI meal, so all the sort of foods I've mentioned already. And there's a couple of suggestions there, so sort of lean meats and chicken and things like that are quite useful. And that you would start at maybe 1 gram to 4 gram per kilogram of your body weight. And these figures are all for sorts of elite athletes and taken from those sorts of studies, etc. But you would start, I would say, at the lower end, and if you're at the elite end, obviously, hopefully you've been through some sort of training, but always worth, as Rob and other people already said, sort of starting and reviewing. In terms of during exercise, usually if exercise is less than 60 minutes, around 30 minutes, you don't really need to have any snacks or food for that. That should be enough, but it's the exercises that you're doing that are more than 60 minutes to longer where you will need regular carbohydrates. So around, this could be, you might want to have some sort of a food or a snack, maybe just before exercise. So obviously if you've eaten, then depending on your blood glucose levels, depending on your insulin system, how you're taking your food and things, these days with a lot of pumps, you don't need to take those snacks that maybe in the past when you were on a pen, you would have had to do so. Whatever works for you now, but worth having a think about that. So that might be a bit more of a high GI snack just before exercise. And then during, you're thinking you probably need around 36 grams of carbohydrate per hour for that first hour. And then if it's a longer, if you've got 60 to 90 minutes or longer activity, you need to be thinking about more carbohydrates. So I can't think, 150 minutes. So yeah, if it's longer than that, then you need 60 to 80, I can't speak today, 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. And as Rob and I have already said, Anne-Marie, to sort of spread that out gradually. So 20 to 30 grams, maybe every 20 minutes. So you're not sort of getting huge spikes and spreading that out. And so this could be a drink, it could be a snack, however you want to do it. And there's various snacks there. So it could be, some fruit and something like some dried fruit, some jelly babies, gels, dextrose tablets, whatever you would need and whatever's easiest and whatever's suited to you and your stomach to sort of tolerate that when you're training. And that obviously does take time to build that up as well. So if you're a distance runner, you probably need to build up that resistance to that sorts of foods and things and snacks that you're eating, because they can obviously cause adverse effects on your bowel. In terms of after exercise, sort of immediately after exercise is usually always best for any sort of protein, carbohydrates and various things. Ideally in that 2 hour window, 1 hour is brilliant, but if you always got some before, after, during exercise or food, if you're having that at regular intervals in the day, hopefully you will always be able to get some sort of carbohydrate. The evidence here is around 1 gram and sort of starting at that per kilogram of your body weight. And this could be a high or low GI meal. I guess again, depending on your blood sugar levels, depending what you know happens after that particular exercise. And you want to sort of think about that. And it may be worth thinking about snacks that you might also have before bed, things like that. So yeah, milkshake, a sandwich, a sports bar, some cereal that's already sort of been mentioned, some fruit with some yogurt, that sort of things. Obviously, if you've got a meal straight after, you would just have your normal meal. And for those of you that maybe don't like tables, I've just got a picture of some of those snacks. Peanut butter sandwich, obviously quite common in America, but becoming a lot more common here. And obviously there are alternative nut butters and various other things available. So yeah, have a look at that, whether that's just a pictorial example. From a protein point of view, proteins, again, a really important nutrient that you do need. And again, you want to be having those 2 to 4 portions. So ideally, 1 at each meal, and then 1 at some snacks as well. So one portion of protein at each snack if you can. From a general population point of view, you don't need a lot, but athletes need a lot more compared to the general population, because you are using and breaking down that protein consistently and then needing to repair that. So the more intense exercise or training or sporting activity that you're doing, the more protein you will probably need. And you need that more for repair. So your body's constantly breaking down your protein and building it back up. So the more you've done, the more active you've been, the more intense, you're going to need some more protein, and you're going to need to repair any damage you've done to that protein. And if you're building muscle, you obviously need a bit more protein to build that muscle. Ideally, there are lots of benefits to spreading that protein out. So thinking about something like 15 to 25 grams of protein at each meal. And like I say, ideally you want to sort of have some after exercise as well. And we know that that sort of helps with protein building. It can help with the blood glucose levels. Lots of benefits to that. The strength and endurance athletes might need a bit more. You know, it's debatable with these sorts of figures, but always start at the bottom and then sort of work your way up is what I would say. And if you're losing weight, you obviously need some more. If you're gaining too much weight, you probably need a little bit less. So review is really important. And from a vegan and vegetarian point of view, it's about the quality of protein, so making sure you get really good biological protein. If you are having foods, some things can restrict various things. So from an iron point of view, having having vegetarian foods, it's really important to them not have things like teas and coffees, because that can restrict the iron you will absorb and certain nutrients. It's better to have things like some sort of fruit juice or some natural fruit within that meal to give it some vitamin C to help absorption of iron, which can be an issue for some athletes. But it's, you know, the amount of decent protein and different types of foods that are out there now is amazing. So tofu, veggie meat, soya meat, mince meats and things like that. Soya tofu, there's a lot of options for you. So fingers crossed you should be able to find those. And again, that's just some pictures of some protein examples for those that don't like tables. And you can see things like nuts and seeds. These are really important from a vegetarian vegan point of view. Things like avocados and healthy fats in your nuts are really good. Lentils, eggs, you know, meat, fish, chicken, all the sort of temporary stuff. Dairy is really good source of good protein. So your milk, cheese, yogurts, that sort of thing. And obviously you've got your soyas and your alternatives if you don't tolerate cow's milk. In terms of vitamins and minerals, these are really important. So regular intense exercise increases your nutrient needs and you're using them a lot more. So there's various ones in terms of your body, things like vitamin D, iron, calcium, and then antioxidants as well is a really important one for athletes. Because you'll just be using them a lot more, your body's turning them over a lot more. There's a higher need if you're doing intense exercise. So you're going to be sort of needing a bit more. So it's important, as I said, to have that balanced diet and really look at your diet to see, are you getting the variety and those portions as I've already mentioned. So low intakes can adversely affect health and performance. We know, things like low iron can cause you to feel quite tired. Vitamin D can cause fatigue and tiredness. So all these sorts of things, you might just think it's just you as normal, but if you think you're not quite sort of doing a healthy diet approach, then you possibly may have some nutrient deficiencies. So it's worth speaking to a dietitian, nutrition expert. In terms of general vitamins and mineral supplements, you can get them, and most of the UK don't get enough vitamin D now. So actually we do recommend to the general population to always have a vitamin D supplement over the winter. And most people who are Black or South Asian or from ethnic backgrounds with darker skin often need vitamin D all year round. So if you're an athlete and you're doing a lot more, you might need a bit more. So, but always be obviously careful if you're working at elite levels and things like that. Supplements can be quite a problem. So obviously making sure you're checking all those things correctly as per what you need to do to make sure you don't get in trouble from taking too many things. Antioxidants, so these are really important. Obviously, we don't talk about them a lot as much now. These were really common 5 years ago, but these are really helpful for protecting you against free radicals that are released when you are doing exercise. So the best thing to do is eat things like fruit and vegetables, aiming for 5 a day, sort of the Mediterranean diet, so more healthy like nuts and seeds and salads and things where olive oil, healthy fats and that sorts of thing is really helpful. Including things like the whole grains that we've talked about from your low GI foods, things like flavonols and polyphenols, flavonoids are quite helpful as well in various aspects, and there's lots of different things, but as long as you're getting a variety of different colours of fruit and vegetables, lots of green leafy vegetables in there, things like onions, garlic, these are all sorts of different vitamins or minerals that will, the different colours of different fruits will have different amounts. Other things to really think about are also things like oily fish can be really helpful, again, from the healthy fats, omega-3s you may have heard of, omega-6s, that sort of thing. So they're very good for protective heart health. And so all of these, it's very much is healthy eating with a bit of an additional thinking. From a hydration point of view, we know dehydration can cause lots of stress on the body. It can increase your core body temperature, and it does affect performance. I worked with a climber once who just didn't drink, and his colleague went on to become second in the training and went on to sort of Olympics, and he sort of fell quite far down, and it was just because he wasn't drinking enough. So often we're sometimes our worst enemies. So really thinking about fluid, it's really tricky to sort of talk about fluid at a sort of basic level. I would say basically try and drink regularly, so pre, post, during, and sort of thinking about fluid at all times. Depends on your fitness level, depends how hot it is, what intensity you've done, to how much fluid you've lost. Often you can weigh yourself before and after if you really want to get a good understanding of how much fluid you've lost, and obviously the aim would be to try and replenish those losses after exercise. So it's important to drink during, before and after, and whatever suits you. So there's, you can drink to people there's prescribed, or you can drink to thirst. Often if you're drinking thirst, there's theory that you might not be drinking enough because you're already thirsty. So important to sort of drink fluids before, whatever you feel you can manage up to that point, and then during in small amounts. So those small sips and taking it steady. And for intense exercise and for those longer duration, you may think about having fluid that also has some extra glucose in it, so like your hypertonic drinks and your isotonic drinks. Being careful with things like caffeine and alcohol, because if you're doing exercise and sport, they may cause fluid losses, and alcohol can obviously have an adverse effect on your body and affect your exercise performance, but also affect your blood glucose levels. And it's another thing that you would have to think about and plan into your day. Not that you don't think about glucose or sugar or carbs at any other point, but there we go. For young athletes, we're thinking, so it's important to give enough calories. They're growing, they have a lot of things happening, they need more protein and calories, so they often need a lot more energy compared to the general population. From a protein point of view, it's comparable, and again, like I say, it's worth sort of starting and increasing as needed. Often having that 20 grams with exercise shortly after exercise, so a post-meal snack, or making sure it's there, will make sure they get it. Often, although there's a lot more younger people leaning towards needing protein supplements and things like that, it's not really needed. You can achieve enough protein through food. The younger athletes also, from a carbohydrate point of view, they often need a lot of carbohydrate because, again, they're growing, they need that for their growth and as well for the training that they're doing. So 50% of energy should be coming from carbohydrates. So they might need a lot more carbohydrate than the portions I've talked about. And again, there's sort of similar levels of carbohydrate is needed per hour for that activity lasting more than 60 minutes. It's not usually needed for under an hour. And, we don't recommend low carbohydrate diets for children and young people who are growing particularly. If that is something you are considering, it's worth talking to your medical team, but it's not something I would promote from an athlete point of view. It can be tricky. There may be days where you do a low carb day, or you're training cyclical, but as a routine, it's not something I would suggest. Might be worth having sort of thinking about regular breaks, because sort of just encourage drinking and getting that sort of thinking, and then afterwards they might be more susceptible as a young person to overheating or dehydration. So important to encourage them to drink maybe a couple of glasses before, sort of an hour before they do the training, and then those sips in between, and then aiming for drinks after. This is just thinking about your diet, now that you've had a little bit of information, have a reflect, have a think about what you're buying, and just plan. A lot of this is planning. Not that you're doing enough planning already. This is further planning. I would recommend trying a new aisle in the supermarket, try some different foods, try a new recipe, If you're not very good at planning and you're not good at implementing the planning that you've got, maybe delegate some of those activities to a parent, a loved one, a friend, and buddy up with someone who is more organised and a bit more planning for you. And again, thinking back to that healthy eating portions, have a think, where are you at in terms of those foods? Is there significant groups that you're not having? Are you just not having any fruit and vegetables? Are you completely not having enough protein? Are you not having any dairy? If you're not having, from a dairy point of view, general healthy population needs at least 3 portions of dairy, so yogurt, cheese, a different type of milk, a different one to give you enough calcium. So if you're not getting those 3 portions of dairy, you might not even be getting enough calcium for the day. And as an athlete, you need more. So really thinking about that, and then trying to maybe map it out. So doing some planning, have a think about, are you having breakfast, lunch, dinner? Are you having a snack? Are you having a post-protein snack after exercise? If you're training more than once a day, are you having a snack after each training session or having a meal in between? So really thinking about things. A couple of goals as a suggestion, I don't know. Maybe you'll take a snack with you. Maybe you will take something, leave something high level in the fridge so you definitely eat it. Some really useful resources. Sadly, I have to go to the Sports Australia dietitians because there's some really, really nice leaflets and booklets. So obviously I can't go through absolutely everything today, but some really nice breakdown guidelines and leaflets there would suggest visiting to have a look, and it's specifically for those with sports. They also have like a type 1 one and various other bits and pieces. And that's me. So thank you for the invite. And these are my sort of Twitter handles. And hopefully I am doing a podcast that's launching soon. And we'll be talking, there'll be the dietitians in the BDA group will be talking to people who are athletes and wanting you to share your stories. So if anyone's interested in wanting to share their sports and exercise story, do get in touch and we'd love to set up a podcast. Thank you.
Brilliant, Nusrat. Thank you so much for sparing us the time this morning to give us that presentation and some brilliant insight there around the nutritional choices that we make as people that are maybe active with type 1 diabetes. So I've certainly learned something, and hopefully many of those people that are watching as well this morning have learned something from your presentation as well. So really, really appreciate you coming on to do that. And I'm sure there'll be some questions as well in the chat and the Q&A. So if you can hang around for a few minutes, Nusrat, that'd be amazing to answer some of those. We're now going to move on to our next sponsor presentation. So just to welcome Alexa from Air Liquide.
Hi there, everyone. Yeah, I'm Alexa from Air Liquide. We distribute the Tandem T-Slim X2 insulin pump on behalf of Tandem Diabetes in the UK. So the T-Slim X2 is the pump that gets updated and not outdated. So what that means is users can benefit from remote software updates. So when new technology comes along, they can simply update their pump to benefit from that. It's a nice, compact and small user-friendly pump with a colour touchscreen and rechargeable battery. And we also provide 24-hour customer support based in the UK. So the pump can be used as a standalone pump, but when used in conjunction with Dexcom G6, users can benefit from Control IQ technology, which is an advanced hybrid closed-loop system, which aims to keep users' time in range between 3.9 and 10 millimoles as much as possible by adjusting insulin delivery accordingly. So the Dexcom and the pump will communicate with each other every 5 minutes, and the Control IQ algorithm predicts 30 minutes in advance of what the blood sugars are going to be. And based on that predicted blood sugar reading, the insulin delivery will be increased, decreased. It may give automatic correction boluses and suspend when someone's going low to try and keep them in range. Control IQ also has unique algorithm features called sleep activity and exercise activity. So during sleep, the algorithm aims to keep tighter control because we don't have the food and exercise going on while we're sleeping. And we also have the exercise activity function, which can be switched on a period of time prior to the exercise commencing. And that aims to run users a little bit higher during exercise to aim to prevent hypoglycemia during exercise. So running a little bit higher than the Control IQ algorithm usually tries to keep people. Some people also use additional personal profiles, which you can have up to 6 in the T-Slim X2 in conjunction with the exercise activity. So you could have an exercise profile where you can really adjust that and personalize that to have different basal profiles, correction factors and carb ratios as well, which some people find really useful for long duration, high intense activity. If you'd like to learn more about the t:slim X2 pump and Control IQ, you can download the T-Simulator app to your smartphone, which just basically means you'll be able to go on the phone and see how the interface of the pump actually works and functions. And you can also visit our website, Making Diabetes Easier, and I'll be answering questions in the Q&A shortly as well. So thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of your day.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alexa, for that presentation. And again, thank you for the support, Air Liquide, for the event today. We're now going to move on to a short comfort break again. So we're going to run with 8 minutes. So if you could be back here for, let's say, 11:53, go and grab yourself a quick refreshment. Again, another cuppa, if that's what you fancy in the break. And we'll see you back here at 11:53, where we'll continue with the next set of presentations. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you're all able to grab yourself a quick drink there and a snack if needed. We're now going to move on to a presentation from one of our sponsors. So I'd like to welcome James from Abbott to present for us.
Hi everybody, my name's James, representing Abbott Diabetes Care. At Abbott, we believe people with diabetes should enjoy active lives, so we're focused on making breakthrough technology accessible and approachable for all. Our groundbreaking sensing technology, both Freestyle Libre 2 and Freestyle Libre 3, is revolutionizing how people monitor their glucose levels and allows people to make better informed treatment decisions throughout their day. A really great example of Freestyle Libre in action is during physical activity, the theme of today's event. People using Freestyle Libre are able to conveniently check their glucose levels, use trend arrows to track which direction their glucose is heading, and set high-low glucose alarms, enabling them to exercise with confidence. I'm going to play a quick video on Freestyle Libre 2, which is easily accessible for people with diabetes, as it is available on prescription. However, you may also wish to speak to your healthcare professional about Freestyle Libre 3. I want to say a big thank you to JDRF for organising this amazing event, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Brilliant. Thank you for the video and the presentation there, James, and thank you for all the support from Abbott for this event and ongoing at JDRF as well. It's now my pleasure to move the conversation from our healthcare professionals supporting us with physical activity and exercise with type 1 diabetes over to those with lived experience tackling physical activity and exercise with type 1. So we're going to move on to our first speaker with lived experience, who is Hannah McCook. So Hannah lives with type 1 and is one of Scotland's leading golfers, turning professional off the back of a third straight Scottish Order of Merit title. And she's here to tell us a story and share some wisdom around how she's carved out a career in golf whilst living with type 1. So it's my pleasure to introduce you, Hannah. Thank you so much for giving up the time, and over to you.
Thanks very much for having me, Chris. I'll just share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah. Yes, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, I am Hannah McCook. I am a professional golfer and type 1 diabetic from Scotland, if you can't tell by my accent already. I was born in July 93, so I've got a big birthday coming up this year. I lived in Aberdeen until I was 6 in 2000, where we then moved to the Scottish Highlands. This is a quick summary on the screen of what I'm going to kind of talk about today. A little bit of summary of my career in sport and being diabetic along the way as well. So yeah, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes on the 18th of February 2002, so it's going to have its 21st birthday in a couple of weeks. I'll probably celebrate that by maybe having a few donuts or something. I was 8 years old. I had no idea what was going on, what was happening. I wasn't very well for a couple of days. I'd been sick during the night on multiple occasions. So on the Monday morning, Mum and Dad said there was no way I was going to school. Phoned the doctor. Unfortunately, the doctor told me they were too busy to come and visit me, so I had to go in. I was sick a few more times in the car on the way in. Instantly, doctor looked at me, did a urine sample, looked at my mum and said, "You know what I'm testing for, don't you?" And my mum was aware that it was probably going to be diabetes, and obviously urine sample came back straight away with ketones, so that was it. I was then put in an ambulance, taken from the doctors in Granton-on-Spey up to Inverness, so 35 minutes in the ambulance on a very bumpy road and really confused on kind of what was happening. I got into the hospital and the drip was obviously applied, but it was tried to be put in my hand, but as an 8-year-old there obviously wasn't much space, so there was a needle broken, which didn't help my kind of little fear of needles straight off the bat. But then it was put in my arms and I was there, I guess, for a few days, and until the doctor said that my mum and dad could manage with me at home and I could kind of help them along with things. So I think I was in for 4 or 5 days, which at the time obviously wasn't great, but it meant 4 or 5 days off school, so I kind of enjoyed that a little bit as well. So I was released with some syringes and some vials of insulin and a folder of how to get on with it, basically. And I guess the rest is a little bit of history, although during the visit in hospital I didn't speak for maybe 2 or 3 days. I was obviously so confused and what was happening and why I was there and why I felt so ill. And my parents didn't really know what to say to me, so they went home and Googled diabetes athletes, because I thought that at that point I wasn't able to go do any sport or anything else, because I was constantly playing football, swimming, skiing at this point, playing tennis with all my friends. So I thought that was it, but they came back into hospital one morning and told me that Sir Steve Redgrave was diabetic. And apparently I just sat out of the bed and said that he was my twin and that I was going to be okay. And from that moment, I've never let it hold me back and still continue to not let it hold me back, and always try and tell others that, yeah, it might be difficult, but there's a way around it and we could always be in a much worse situation. So going back a little bit to living with diabetes during primary school, I was diagnosed in primary 4. So I was obviously old enough to understand that I wasn't in school. My friends were kind of worried where I was and whatever. And I went back into school and they had multiple questions for me, and things had changed not only for me, but for them. And obviously my parents, more so probably my parents and me, they had to learn how to deal with things and look after me, and the constant worry of, was I going to be okay? And obviously back then there was no CGM, they couldn't follow what was going on, so they set me off into school with my blood test kit and hoped the teachers would look after me, basically. I was on injections breakfast time and dinner, so it was just twice a day, and then just had to regulate as best I could whilst continuing to do the sport that I enjoyed doing. I mean, obviously I had to prepare a lot more for things. I was straight back into the ski club at Cairngorm a couple of weeks later, and my ski coach carried a box of sweeties and supplies for me just in case we were stuck up the hill and I was hungry. But that was the support that kind of everybody needs, especially as a youngster that's diagnosed with something that's going to change their life. But my school was very supportive. It was a little school in the village of Nethy Bridge, so it was I think there was 90 pupils when I left it. I went on a couple of school trips and we had a nurse that came with us, so she was my main point of contact for those 2 weeks. And 1 week was in Edinburgh and 1 week was in the Isle of Skye. That was the first time I kind of got released, I guess, from the parents for a couple of days to live my own little life and with diabetes and see how I got on, and successfully managed to navigate a few days away. And yeah, there was a few roller coasters along the way, but it was a learning experience for me and my teachers and my parents, I guess. And then in 2011, no, sorry, that's a lie, 2005, I left primary school and went into secondary school in Granton-on-Spey. I continued with sport. Obviously, I increased how much I was doing. I was playing golf by this point, tennis, skiing, football, swimming, everything that you could think of. In my first year, I was a Scottish school ski champion, and I was obviously diabetic by this point, so that was quite an achievement. I remember standing at the top of the race course with a pretty low blood glucose of, I think I was in the region of 3 point something. This was maybe 2 or 3 racers before me, and I had to take some syrup. My mum was with me, and I remember so many other kids looking at me as if I was doping, which, you probably looking back now, it might well have been taking syrup right in the start of a race course. I then went on to win the event, which was pretty cool, and that was probably the peak of my ski career before golf kind of really took over. I was a Scottish schools runner-up in my final year of school, but there had been a few other things before that I'll touch on as I go into my golf career in a few moments. As you can see, I've mentioned there, Lucozade was on the exams desk at all times. There was always supplies with me, no matter where I went. My biggest fear, as probably many of you, is the same, that I will be caught short somewhere with no sugar and I'll be having a hypo. I would always obviously be running high during an exam due to the stress, but knowing the Lucozade was there would kind of help me feel like I was going to be okay. I started to travel more, playing golf. I went on a couple of ski trips during school. I'd be going away with friends and staying over at friends' house, and things were, obviously I was getting busier. I had to take another couple of injections during the day, but I was quite stubborn and avoided an injection at lunchtime during my school career because I just thought that would cause too much hassle. I wanted to play football at lunchtime. I was playing basketball. I was playing tennis some lunchtimes. So there was no way I wanted to be fighting with all that. So until I left school, I managed to knock back a lunchtime injection. But as soon as I left school, I thought it was probably time that was done. So basically, when I was in school, I started to travel more. My first proper adventure, I would say, was in 2009. I went to Texas with a group of other golfers from the north of Scotland. I was on 4 injections a day at the time. I had to deal with, I think it was a 7-hour time difference, was the first time I'd really dealt with that, and heat during the day, which obviously for the first few days my blood glucose was terrible, was all over the place. I was a bit stressed with that. I was just trying to play golf and have fun, but it was all a bit overwhelming really. But come the end of the first week, I think I kind of came to terms with what's going on and thought that it's okay, I'm still fine. I can just keep playing golf and I'll get home and I'll manage to fix things for the next time I do something like that. So I was very fortunate to have such adventure during my school days that have led me to where I am now and kind of gave me the strength, I guess, to know that I can continue to play golf and other sports and be diabetic at the same time. I then left school in 2011 and went to University of Stirling. I studied a BA Honours in Sports Studies and was also part of the International Sports Scholarship Programme, which I was very fortunate to have for all 4 years whilst I was there. As you can see on the left there's a few events that I played in during my career at university, which I'll touch on again when I go on to talk more about my golf career. As I said, I started university. I was then doing 5 injections by this point a day because I'd reluctantly said I would do one at lunchtime. Things changed a little bit though. In my 3rd year, I was fortunate to get asked by my medical team in Inverness whether I wanted to go onto a pump, which I wasn't sure about at the start because I wasn't really overly sure about having something attached to me constantly. But I thought if it's going to help me, it's going to give me a little bit more freedom. It's definitely something I wanted to try, and I have never looked back. That was probably the biggest moment that changed my life, my career, everything. The fact that I could play golf and not have to do an injection whilst on the golf course during lunchtime or battle things like that. I could just change basal rates and press buttons as I go to fix my blood sugars. That was a moment that I thought, why have I not done this before? But yeah, irregular blood sugars, trying to get used to being a student. I wasn't one that went out all that often. The nights out in Stirling were nights the next morning I was going to be in the gym early, so I didn't do it often unless it was much more of an occasion. But I did find myself having some interesting evenings with blood glucose whilst out in the town, I guess. So now I'm going to go a bit more detail kind of into my golf career and how maybe things have been affected with that and being diabetic at the same time, and how I would say it's led to where I am, being quite a robust, strong person, I would probably like to say. Everybody's obviously got their own journey of things that are going on, but I think being a diabetic, as many of you will know, it makes you a bit stronger, it makes you aware of more things going on, maybe a bit more empathy for others at times. So as you can see in the picture on the left, I first hit a golf ball when I was 6 years old with the help of my mum there in Aberdeen. Obviously at this point I was not diabetic, but I guess it was lying dormant in my body at this point, so at some point it was going to appear. I enjoyed the initial playing of golf. It is so much harder than I thought it was, but enjoyed the excitement. I then moved to the Highlands, as I'd already mentioned, and I got my first handicap when I was 9, and by this point I was diabetic. I was playing a 9-hole golf course in Lethbridge, and I'd be playing junior medals on a Friday afternoon, and my mum would come for a walk with me just to make sure I was eating and my blood sugars were okay, and effectively started her caddy career for me when I was 9 years old, which feels like a very long time ago now, but a lot has happened since then. I was fortunate to be invited to Scotland squad in 2007. I went to a trial day and they somehow picked me, I guess. That was for a winter training camp just here in Scotland, and then subsequently was selected for the under-16 squad for that following April for an event. And that was the first time I'd represented my country, was trying to fight some interest in blood sugars during those couple of days, as it was nerve-wracking, the adrenaline, the stress, and as I've come to still deal with these days, actually more so now probably, is how much adrenaline affects my blood glucose levels. I don't think I was so much aware of it back then, but now, more so now that I know that is something that I'll constantly have to battle with and to deal with. I then progressed on to under-18 team, a home international, so that's Scotland, England, Ireland and Wales, and I played that in 2010 and 2011. That was my first under-18s cap, and I was delighted just to pull on the Scotland jumper again. There's nothing more special than representing your country. And then I played in the European Girls Team Championships for Scotland in my 2011, just after I'd left high school. That was I guess the second time really that I'd been away somewhere really hot and dealing with diabetes. I was playing in Sardinia in the middle of July, and it was roasting, and the days were really long, and I was doing injections to try and counteract the stress, adrenaline, the temperature, and all these things that came with that. And I was probably more nervous about all of that than I was actually about the golf, which sometimes now is a very similar thing. So it's all quite an interesting time. And as I've already touched on, between 2011 and 2015, I was part of the University of Stirling Sports Programme, which led to events such as the World University Games in 2015. It was also roasting in South Korea in the middle of July. Humidity was extreme. By this point, I was on, I think it was the Medtronic pump that I first started on, which was great. I mean, I could obviously just press the buttons and take some insulin when I realised things weren't quite where they should be, but it didn't help when the heat was extreme and I was sweating and lost a couple of patches off me because of the heat that it would sweat off. So I had to nip back into Clubhouse one occasion to change it. And then by that point, I realised I probably should have spares in my golf bag. So these little life lessons along the way teach you for things like that. But I almost played every week when I was in the spring semester of university. I would be away playing competitions and competing, and I was fortunate enough to win the Scottish universities and the British universities whilst at Stirling, and it definitely gave me the ground to move on to subsequently turn professional a few years later. But I would say that was the highlights of my career, came playing for university in the Team GB at the World Uni Games was a massive thing to have done. And still, I guess, during my time at uni, but then I left in 2015. I represented the ladies team at the home internationals for 6 years straight. I think one of the most consecutive times actually for someone to have played, and we won that in 2018, my last one playing. that before I subsequently turned professional. But I played ladies European team championships as well. Again, fighting some heat in Portugal in the middle of July, and obviously I was on a pump by this point, so things were a little bit easier. I wasn't having to take, I was taking injections with me in case my pump failed, but I wasn't having to actually do them, thankfully. But I think it was 2018, it was in August, was I changed insulin pump to an Omnipod, which for me has been one of the biggest changes of my diabetes management and my golf career. The fact it was tubeless, I was able to wrap up warm in Ireland in the August when we won the home internationals under my waterproofs and not have to find the pump to press buttons or find skin to do an injection. I was able just to take the PDM out my golf bag and press little buttons and keep going. I think that was a big game changer for me, and not having to the extra stress of dealing with things whilst you're kind of in the heat of battle. And then also in late 2018 got the use of Dexcom, which has also changed massively for me. So I was able to then just load it onto my phone and look at blood glucose for that. I wasn't having to find a finger that was maybe hot and sweaty or wet in the rain to get blood out of and wait to get a reading. I was able just to quickly glance at my phone and continue on where I was and keep playing. This all led to the end of 2018. I went to qualifying school to turn professional, and that was held in Morocco, another hot location. And I was super nervous about trying to turn pro and move on with my career, as well as managing diabetes in such a high stress environment. And that was probably the most stress I'd ever felt. I had unbelievably amount of supplies packed just in case things failed, didn't work. I was so nervous that I would be in a situation where I wasn't able to control my diabetes and my golf at the same time. So my baggage was always overweight and always is overweight, just because of the amount of supplies I take and snacks just in case I can't get to a shop easily or things like that. So if anyone ever wanted a snack, they would come to me and they'd find it in my golf bag, that's for sure. So I first played 2019 as a professional. I traveled the world, started off my season in South Africa, and then was in Europe most of the year after that. It was a good season, first season on tour. Learning new things along the way, insulin pump failing mid-season, having to get a new one shipped out to Switzerland, all these kind of stresses that went along with just trying to manage diabetes, let alone trying to get a career in golf on the go, I guess. And then in 2020, I was in South Africa as our lockdown was announced. So I came home quickly before I was stuck out there. Didn't travel for the rest of the year. I wasn't really sure what would happen if I got COVID whilst diabetic and all these things that were all so uncertain at the time. So I thought it was best to just stay at home, stay in the Highlands where there was little people around me, and just kind of lay low for the rest of the year. Unfortunately, in 2021, at the start of the year, I had surgery on my left hip. So that meant I had to then stay another season back at home, rehab, and all that went on for months and months, which obviously is hard enough as it is as an athlete, but with diabetes on the side, it caused a few more problems during the surgery. My blood glucose was fine. It was actually probably perfect the whole day leading up to the surgery because I had it in the evening. It was then the next few days, obviously the body reacted to how the surgery had gone, and my blood sugars were high, and no matter how much insulin I took, it was basically like I was taking water. It wasn't really coming down, and obviously I was so inactive compared to where I'd been even the week before. So I had a bit of a struggle for a few weeks there. It was probably, so the surgery was the start of March. It was probably by the end of March that I noticed things had steadied out a little bit, because I was able to kind of shuffle around a little bit more and was back doing a little bit of exercise. But that was a tough time, probably the hardest time of my career so far, being out for the full season. It was 24 weeks before I was able to hit a full driver golf shot, basically. So it felt like a long time, but I'm definitely glad I've been through that because it's a lot better now. So then I went back onto tour last year, 2022, start of the season. Blood sugars all over the place, back to stress, back to adrenaline, back to being like, what is going on here? Fortunately, obviously I've got the Omnipod and Dexcom, so I could control things as best I could, but It was kind of difficult, the stress at the start of the season, and having been out for so long, my blood sugars were steadily in the 20s or low 20s the first couple of rounds. And no matter what I did, they wouldn't really shift. But I've noticed over the years that I play a little bit higher blood glucose wise. I can perform better than I can if I'm low. Yeah, it's not good, probably long term, but if that's where I'm going to be, I'd rather be a little bit higher than on the low end. I feel a little bit drunk when I'm low. I can't concentrate, and I lose the feeling in my hands a little bit to be able to control the golf ball. So being high is not great, but it's better than feeling a little bit drunk. So 22 was interesting. It was a very good season actually. I ended up 12th on the order of merit for the Access Ladies European Tour Access tour that I play on. So I was quite happy with that, with a couple of runner-up spots during the season. So I was relatively pleased in how my comeback season had gone. I've now had a winter at home. I've just spent the last 2 weeks near Dubai training to get ready for this season. That obviously high blood sugars on the odd occasion just with the heat, but generally that was probably the best they've been when I've been away in heat and practicing and things. So hopefully this season will stand me in good stead with better diabetes control. There's just a couple of pictures of me playing and competing along the way. I've obviously touched on a few stories of what's happened and when I've been away, and probably my biggest fears, I've said, is being stuck somewhere with no sugar and not being able to do things, or not having enough supplies in case things go wrong. So I'm definitely over prepared when it comes to things like that, but I guess that helps keep the anxiety and all that a little bit lower. I'm very fortunate being able to travel the world. I was in Australia last spring playing, and been in Dubai there just the last couple of weeks. So I've seen every continent bar Antarctica. So I'm very, very fortunate for these travels that I've had and the opportunities that have been given to me. As an athlete though, I spend a lot of time not just on the golf course but in the gym as well, which, as we've touched on in previous talks earlier this morning, that has influenced blood sugar wise, and depending on the type of training I'm doing, how my blood sugars are affected by that. Generally I do weight training, so I actually sometimes have to increase a little bit of insulin that I take and take some more after, but every day can be so different to me, and there's not a set routine really that I have. So I'm probably generally in the gym in the mornings, but that might change a little bit. So I don't really have much basal presets. I kind of just, I guess, wing it a little bit as the day goes to see what's going on, which probably won't help a few of you who might have more of a routine than I do, but it keeps it interesting and keeps it a little bit challenging. But yeah, diabetes is hard and it's a struggle at times, but to be honest, I probably wouldn't change it. It's made me who I am. It's made me stronger as a person. It's kind of give me a little bit more insight into how my body works and things whilst I am training and competing. So it's quite, in a weird way, it's quite a nice feeling to have, that you know what your body's doing and you control things a little bit differently. Though at times I've had a few issues in the gym with using one of the bars, and I've knocked off a pump or a CGM or thing, so I've had to phone up the supply team and ask for a new one because I've ripped it off. But if that's the worst that's going to happen in the gym, then that's probably okay. I am fortunate, as I've said before, I use Omnipod and Dexcom, and I am actually an ambassador for both of them, which I'm very fortunate for their support, and I try and do what I can to help them in return and show others that are using the devices that diabetes doesn't need to stop you from doing what you want to do, and it can kind of come along for the ride, so to speak. And having the technology now has made a massive difference in my career and my life in general. I mean, as I said before, having to do injections and work out time zone changes and things like that, whereas now I can literally get the PDM out and change the time on it, and it instantly knows that I've changed 4 hours backwards or forwards or whatever. So yeah, I'm very fortunate that I've got the help of these two companies, and look forward to working with them more in the future.
Last minute.
The last little bit I've got actually is I've done JDRF 100 challenge a couple of years ago. I try and do my bit as much as I can for others that are diabetic, and I've had a lot of people support me over the years, so I want to try and do my little bit for everyone else. I ran over 100 kilometers in the month of November 2020, starting by 3.3k a day, and I think by the last week I was doing almost I think I did a few 5Ks and a couple of 10Ks. And for me, who wasn't a runner, that was a massive achievement. So I did way more than 100 kilometers and ran and raised over £1,000. So I was delighted with that. And I've done a few JDRF talks before, and there's a picture of me and a couple of little Dexcom kids back in the day. So if I can do these things and at least help one person with what I do, then it leaves me a very happy person. So I think that's all from me. I hope you've enjoyed a little bit about my story and can relate to some things I've talked about.
Wow, thank you, Hannah. I think when you'll look into the comments in a minute and into the chat, you'll see, if you didn't know already, what an inspiration you are to people with type 1 diabetes. There's some amazing comments for you there, and thank you for sharing all of that inspiration and the insight on your journey with us today. It will help so many people, so I'm sure those listening have really enjoyed that and taken a lot from it. So thank you, Hannah, and I know you're going to stick around for the panel with us at the end, so again, appreciate your support with that. We're also now going to have another lived experience speaker join us from a different kind of sport. So Hannah, obviously coming from a golfing background, we're now going to go into the world of weightlifting and bodybuilding as well, as with Khalid Keshta. So Khalid is a qualified coach, sports nutrition advisor, diabetes specialist, influencer, bodybuilder, former footballer. His repertoire, it has no ends, it seems, Khalid, and you're a big advocate, big influencer across social media and supporting people with type 1 diabetes. So thank you for joining us as well today. And yeah, over to you. I'm not going to steal any more of your thunder. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris, for that great introduction. Thank you guys for having me. So I'm very aware of the time, so I'm going to try to be quick with my story. Let me share my screen first. Here we go. Perfect. So here we go. So my name is Khalid, and I've been living with type 1 diabetes for the past 11 years. I did get diagnosed on my 18th birthday, and it was one hell of a diagnosis. It was a gift, I'd say. By profession, I actually graduated from university as a civil engineer. So a lot of people don't know this, but I took a different route. I did work in construction for about 4 years. Then I took a different route, became a personal trainer, a nutritionist, diabetes specialist, and I do some trading as well right now. Mainly, I do lots of content creation. I create lots of courses, and there's a thing that I'm working on right now. It's a very comprehensive diabetes course in English and in Arabic, because I do speak Arabic as well. That would help athletes and parents to manage their diabetes or their kids' diabetes. So I'll jump in each and every point in details now. So my diagnosis, and I used to play football as well, forgot to say this. I used to be an ex-footballer. I used to play for Swindon Town till I ruptured my ligaments and I broke my knee. We'll jump into that for a bit. So my diagnosis story. I know you're looking at the picture on the left. You think that I was very skinny. I want to tell you that this was 3 months after I got diagnosed. So that was 3 months after putting on the weight that I lost. So I was like 10 kg lighter than the picture on the left that you see. So what happened was I started getting all the typical symptoms that everyone used to have, but I had them quite severe. I used to lose a lot of weight. I used to drink a lot of water. I used to pee a lot. I get very angry, short-tempered, I can't concentrate. And I saw this in my studies and how it affected my football. So when I'm playing football, I can see that, hey, something is wrong. Luckily, both my parents were doctors, but unfortunately, they never doubted that I do have diabetes because I was just a healthy young kid. So it took time for them to notice that. And then what happened is that my mom decided to buy a blood glucose monitor. And when we were testing my blood sugar at home, it always gave an error message. And by giving an error message, it meant, when I read the fine print, it meant that either there's not a lot of blood or the blood sugar is too high. It's out of range. And we double checked that because my siblings and my parents, when they were checking their blood sugar, it gave them the value. So it was like between 5 and 6, something between the normal range. Straight away, they rushed me to the hospital, went there, checked my blood sugar, and it was 47 millimoles per liter, which is astonishingly high. In the American readings, that's around 850 milligrams per deciliter. So it was very high. Straight away, they put me into on insulin drips. I went into a coma straight away, and it was only for one night. I went into a coma and I woke up hypoglycemic when my blood sugar was 15, which actually isn't hypoglycemic, as you guys know. It's actually hyperglycemic, but my body adapted so much to the high blood sugar that I was going through, to a point that 15 was very low to me. I woke up hypo, didn't understand what's going on, had a quick sandwich, and then slept again. And then woke up the next day, oh, Khalid, you're diabetic. And I had no clue what that meant. When people ask me all the time, how did I feel when I got diagnosed? The answer is a bit shocking. I was actually happy. I felt that I'm blessed, because first thing, I knew what was wrong. So I believe I had type 1 diabetes for at least 2 years without knowing, and I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what it was. So the fact that I know what it was, and I knew that there is a treatment for it, not a cure, but a treatment, then I got happy. The other thing was, when I woke up, I kind of felt revived. How? Because I was very, very ill before that. That once I woke up, I started seeing HD colors. In a way, I started feeling, hey, I'm not very dehydrated. So for me, I didn't care about what's going to happen afterwards. I didn't care about me living on insulin or being counting carbs all the time and whatnot. I just cared about, hey, I feel good now. I'm happy. So that was me answering that question. Straight away after diagnosed, the day after, I went to my football training, and I had the best form I ever had, and it was crazy because out of nowhere, just a week ago, I used to suffer. I used to be the worst player on the pitch, and now I was the best player on the pitch. So it was a bit crazy how the treatment helps. So I was blessed. But what happened 3 months later is I suffered from a career-ending injury. I broke my knee, I ruptured my cruciate ligaments, and I had 2 operations actually, and both of them failed. Then I decided, I knew that it's over. I can't do it. But however, this kind of, as I say, it's kick-started my bodybuilding career, because I was active all the time. I didn't want to stay sedentary at all. So I decided that I want to carry on doing something. So I started going to the gym. I'm going to jump in here. Started going to the gym, started training, and I realized that my body is transforming just like anyone else, if not even better. And there's obviously a genetic factor there. But I just didn't see any difference between someone that has diabetes and someone that doesn't, when it comes to muscle building, when it comes to being able to get involved into activities or exercise. Now, why am I saying misconceptions everywhere? The reason I am doing what I'm doing, or the reason I even started heading to becoming a bodybuilder, and obviously creating my social media and creating the content I create, working with companies, changing my career completely, changing the path, the route of my life to something related to diabetes, is because I saw tons of misconceptions online. And not just online, like people in personal life. So people that would come to me in the gym and see me injecting insulin, for example, and they would come to me and think that it's a growth hormone pen or a steroid pen. And then I explain to them, no, I have diabetes, so I need to take insulin. And then they think, oh, so you became diabetic because you took insulin to grow, because insulin is an anabolic hormone. And I'm like, no, I am diabetic, so I have to take insulin to live. And that kind of blew everyone's mind, that they look at me and they think, hey, how that's impossible for you to kind of have that muscular physique, or to be able to do these high intensity exercises and have diabetes at the same time. And that's when I realized there was a lot of misconceptions in the world about diabetes. I searched online, I started my social media accounts, and I found similar questions everywhere. Everyone asks me, how can you become fit, or how can you have the patience and have the strength to be able to go through a diet while having diabetes. And that's when I started everything that I'm doing. Okay. Thankfully, I achieved some stuff. So as I said, I graduated from a civil engineering background. So I had a master's degree in civil engineering. And after that, I became a qualified nutritionist and a personal trainer. And then I started competing in bodybuilding just to show people that, hey, if I am just training in the gym and if I'm posting photos or videos online and people are getting shocked or they're getting inspired by just seeing someone that is training, and I'm not the only person out there. We've got Hannah, we've got lots of people in every different sport. There's someone that is doing really well with type 1 diabetes. I thought, let me take it to that extra step and try to compete. So I went to one of the bodybuilding shows as a spectator. I watched them. I was like, cool, but I want to do this. And I decided that I'm going to prep. I couldn't find a coach that can help me because I had to have someone that has the same condition as me. And that's very important when it comes to chronic conditions, is that you want to get help from someone that understands what you're going through. So I did it all by myself. My first competition was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life because it was all about trial and error. I'm going to jump into that in the next slide. But I decided that I want to compete just for the sole reason to show people that if I can do this, if I can win and if I do win, in one of the hardest sports ever, as someone with type 1 diabetes competing against people that don't have diabetes, and that's important to acknowledge when you win, then people can do it with anything really, like any sports or not even sports, like when you're studying, when you're working. Like basically what I want to say is that don't take diabetes as an excuse at all. I did it, and every time I won, I put my insulin pen in my trophy. I think you can't see it here, or I try to show my sensor. So right here on my core, you can see the sensor. I just want to show off. And that's what I started doing anyway, even not on stage. When I'm out and about, I try to wear like short sleeves to kind of show my sensor. I love when people engage with me talking about diabetes, and I do, when I'm on stage, it's I'm either raising awareness about diabetes because people ask me questions. Oh, what is that sensor? Is that like a nicotine patch or whatever? And then I tell them, yeah, no, that's diabetes. Or people that know what it is, they kind of get motivated. So I'm just happy that sometimes I inspire others, I hope. And then I started doing a lot of stuff online as well. So I've got my social media. I started growing it maybe, I don't know, like 10 years ago. I created a platform for people with diabetes to try to mentor them, help them, share all our experiences together. And that was the route that I'm taking. Now, what challenges did I go through all this? So there are so many. So I'm just like anyone here. I've got my highs, I've got my lows. I'm never in denial that diabetes comes with challenges, but I don't accept anyone being negative about it. Yeah, you can have a burnout, that's normal, but some people, they kind of hang their excuses on diabetes, and I'll go through this now. So challenges that I had is, first of all, I was experimenting on myself. I didn't know anyone that wanted to take their physique to that next level that had diabetes. Personally, there are people online that have type 1 diabetes and did compete, but I personally didn't know anyone, so I had to keep on experimenting with myself, and that was an issue because bodybuilding by itself is very hard. Now imagine combining diabetes management, and that includes lots of highs, lots of insulin resistance, lots of uncertainty in where your blood sugar is going, because the hormones in the system are not normal in a way. And by that I mean that when your body fat is very low, your hormonal imbalance occurs. So stuff I had to deal with. Fluctuations with the blood sugar that I had to deal with as well. So when I'm competing, or not even competing, when I'm just training as you saw on the slides earlier, my training consists of aerobic and anaerobic exercises all the time. So there's so much fluctuation. So without me understanding and studying what effect each exercise will have on me, and then what factors it will what effect the other factors will have on me at the same time, then I will struggle. And I definitely did struggle with my first competition. Another challenge is I had to accept the fact that I will have bad days, which is very normal. So each and every one of us, you will have a bad day. Just don't let that day define your diabetes, or don't let that day or don't let that hour define the rest of your day, put it that way. I understood. Now, how did I challenge them, and how did I started knowing what I know now? First of all is education. I had to educate myself. I had to become responsible. So I'm jumping to this point right here. Everyone has a physician or a nutritionist or a coach or endocrinologist that's taking care of them, which is great. But at the end of the day, it's your diabetes and you got to be responsible for it. So you got to keep on educating yourself on how to tackle specific activities or specific tasks that you do, and what effect each and every task and factor will have on your blood sugar. Because remember, everyone is different, and that puts us back to that point, the importance of trial and error. Trial and error is very underestimated when it comes to diabetes. You can't just read an article online, or you can't just take an equation from someone and apply it and think that's going to work just blindly. I can't tell you your insulin to carb ratio. I can't tell you your your correction dose, or no one can. We can give you references, but then you will have to implement it and then do minor or major modifications to be able to make it work for you. So importance of trial and error, importance of exercise orders. Again, that was covered earlier. Exercise order is very important. Something I learned the hard way is when your blood sugar is high, you want to do the exercise that would help drop it. You don't want to do the exercise that will help elevate it. Otherwise, you're just messing it up. So you either do this, or you have to check your insulin dosage. You have to check your insulin timing. I'm not going to give any medical advice in this presentation, but that's something very important to understand the effect of each exercise, and then to understand, okay, today which one should I do, or which one should I start with, and so on. Time and target. Lots of people, they think that, oh, my blood sugar is high today or now. It's like I'm hyperglycemic, I messed up. It's not about that. It's not about that one spike that you will have. It's about how hard you're working on trying to make the time and target better. Okay, you want to better your diabetes management in a way, and that would result in better HbA1c. So it's all connected. It's all about basically not having any negative mentality towards diabetes, I'd say. Last two things on this slide is prevent, not treat, and type 2. I have a motto that says prevent, not treat, which means diabetes complications or issues that will arise from having diabetes will happen if your blood sugar is not in range. So if you know for a fact that, let's say, you're going to go hypoglycemic or you're going to go hyperglycemic for whatever reason, do not wait for it to happen. Try to treat it. Of course, sometimes it's inevitable, such as when you're stressed, or when you have a flu, or when you have anything that would work on your insulin resistance, would just make you extremely resistant. When I had COVID, I was very insulin resistant, that my blood sugars didn't drop beneath 20 for a few days. So it's inevitable sometimes. But if you know, if you're going to go to exercise and you know that specific exercise drops your blood sugar level, don't wait for it to drop. Try to treat it first, and the other way around. Where I have type 2 here, what I mean by this is normally people that have type 2 diabetes, to treat or to manage their condition, they would be looking into behavioral changes such as dieting, exercising, just becoming more healthier, choosing the foods wisely, and so on. Now, type 1 diabetes isn't just about insulin intake and isn't just about counting carbs. No, if you think about your type 1 diabetes as management of type 2 diabetes, so you want to apply the same behavioral changes as well. That's going to help you a lot with your insulin resistance. And insulin resistance, if you get rid of it, you can't get rid of it, but if you know how to control it, that will make a huge difference to you or to your kids. So that's the mentality that I have, and that's what I try to give to my clients and to people that ask me, is just think about what happened with type 2 diabetes, apply it with type 1 diabetes, obviously, plus your insulin intake and so on. So I have some goals. So my main goals actually is to show people that diabetes is not an obstacle. I say this all the time, that diabetes will give us some challenges, but it's not gonna stop us. So you can't say that you're not gonna achieve X because you have diabetes, but you can say that, okay, I will achieve this, but I might have some difficulties. How am I gonna tackle these challenges, or how I'm gonna tackle these difficulties? That's the mentality that I try to provide people. I just try to inspire people, because some people, as I said, use diabetes as a hanger for failure, and that's not the case. And if you use that as a case, that's a problem, because as we're speaking, as of now, type 1 diabetes does not have a cure. So if you're going to live all your life thinking that you can't do something because of diabetes, then you will never do it till there is a cure. I hope there is, but there isn't now. So yeah, you gotta crack on, keep going, and you gotta educate yourself. And as I said in the previous slide, be responsible for your own diabetes. Another thing that I always try to do is to build and expand the awareness online. So by doing the content that I create, by creating the courses. So right now, as I said, I'm working on a very, very comprehensive course that hopefully is going to be out in the middle of this year. To try to help people with their management, because there is, of course, some lack of education in some areas, especially in developing countries. So originally, by the way, I come from Egypt. When I travel there, some people, they don't understand like the education that you guys have here isn't everywhere. So we're blessed that we have the NHS, but some areas they don't. So that's what I try to do, try to help people around the globe. Obviously, I achieved my own success as well. So I want to compete again. I've been injured for a year, so I didn't train properly for a whole year since January last year. I ruptured a ligament here called TFCC. I've been dealing with it. I want to get back to it. I want to compete again, get back in shape. And of course, most importantly, is to better my own diabetes management. That this is more important than all the above is. I am only human, so some people think that because I've got that physique, then I have like 100% time and target all the time. That's never the case, by the way. Yes, I try to reach that every day, but that's not the case. I still have my lows and my highs, so I want to better my diabetes management as well, just like any of you. That's it. If you want to reach me, so my Instagram is my main account. I use that the most. So it's Mr. Keshta. It's at the bottom right. And then my academy. So I have a diabetes academy. It's called diabetesacademy.net or keshtaacademy.com, where I just keep on creating content and I pour it into it, and I have all my coaching plans on it as well. But yeah, that's it from me. Thank you guys for listening. I'm going to jump into the chat and the questions now and see if you have any questions.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that, Khalid. And yeah, an amazing inspirational story as well to follow Hannah's. Lots of insight as well to support people's knowledge and the way that you approach your sport and your physical activity. So thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I know you're going to be sticking around now for the lived experience panel as well. So if there's questions in the chat, you can jump in and try and answer those, whilst I'm also going to be posing some questions to all of those joining us on the lived experience panel as well. So that leads me on nicely to where we're going now, which is to invite a couple of the speakers that we've had on already. So Hannah and Khalid are going to join us, but also to add a few more with lived experience as well to this panel, where I'm going to essentially go to each person and I'm going to pose particular questions about their experiences living with type 1 diabetes whilst tackling physical activity and exercise. So it's a pleasure to welcome Natalie, Julie, Nia and Andy to the panel alongside Hannah and Khalid. So if I can just start with some introductions, just so we can show you all off to those watching. We'll start with Julie. So Julie, could you just give us a bit of a brief introduction about your link to type 1 and how it relates to what you get up to in terms of physical activity and exercise?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Julie Kiefer. I've been living with type 1 for 26 years. I'm a competitive swimmer and Ironman triathlete. And I'm also the founder of the Diabetic Travelers Network, which is a social impact business and community that helps people with type 1 to travel.
Brilliant. Thank you, Julie. And Nia?
Morning. Hi, my name's Nia. I'm a parent of a type 1 12-year-old who was diagnosed when he was 6. He loves his sport, so rugby, football, swimming, skiing, basketball and all sorts. He does it because he loves it. But it's fair to say as parents, we sort of actively chose when he was diagnosed to try and harness sport as a means of adding to his toolkit, I guess, to be able to cope with it long term for life. And he chooses to use a pen and a Libra 2.
Brilliant, thanks, Nia. Natalie?
Hi everyone, so I'm Natalie and I'm also a parent to my son Tom, who is type 1 and he was diagnosed 5 years ago. He's 13 now, so he was 8 when he was diagnosed, just 8. He uses a hybrid closed loop with Dexcom and T-Slim, which is we've been pumping for about 3 years. He is also profoundly deaf and he's a cochlear implant user, so that does have additional challenges, particularly, for example, overnight he doesn't hear any of his alarms, so that is an added challenge for us as a family and for Tom. And also when he's playing sport, he's a very, very keen footballer. He plays for his local team and he's also getting involved with para football with the FA and with the sort of long-term aim to possibly play for the deaf squad for England, which would be amazing. He plays a lot of badminton as well. So sometimes with the additional challenge of the hearing loss, that can be difficult for him, hearing alarms and things when he's playing. Anybody that's thinking about doing some fundraising for JDRF, I did last year, completed the cycling challenge, and I can thoroughly recommend getting yourself involved with something like that because the support from JDRF was excellent and managed to raise a few £100. So if you're thinking about it, go for it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Natalie. And I didn't put you up to that positive credit in there for JDRF, so thank you as well for that. And then Andy, over to you.
Hi everyone, Andy Buckle here. Apologise for the quality of my video. I've got a new computer and the camera's not working properly. So I'm a 46-year veteran of type 1. I was diagnosed when I was 11. Now I'm 57. Obviously, the journey through the different types of technology. I've been through all of that. And I've now ended up with, I'm on an insulin pump with CGM, and I use one of the do-it-yourself closed loop systems. In terms of activity, I mean, I feel somewhat humbled after going after Hannah and Khalid, but I've always been physically active, and I've found that's helped tremendously, not just with the diabetes, the health aspects of my diabetes, blood sugar control, but also my mental health, just being physically active. I ran several half marathons. I ran the London Marathon in 1998. I've competed at the British Indoor Rowing Championships on the gym machines. I've done a lot of kettlebell training in the past. Now, at the age of 57, I find myself pretty much lifting weights exclusively 4 times a week. And yeah, so physical activity is tremendously important to me in terms of the management of my diabetes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. And we'll skip over the introductions of Khalid and Hannah. I think we know a little bit about their stories from their talk. So that's we'll move over to our first question, which I'm going to pose. And also, if anybody wants to pose a particular question that I can ask the panel, please do drop it in the Q&A or in the chat, and that will get over to me, and hopefully I'll be able to just pose it to everybody that's involved on the panel. So first question, and I'm going to come to Khalid first on this one. What is it that you carry with you, Khalid, to ensure that you can manage your type 1 diabetes effectively on, around the different types of physical activity? What is it your go-to?
So 3 things. You must have your insulin, your sugar, and your blood glucose monitor. So right now, I'm thankful that I am on a sensor. So I'm wearing a Libra right now. Sometimes I'm on a pump, on an Omnipod. If not, then I'm on an insulin pen. And I always have some sort of, if I'm exercising, it's going to be either a Lucozade, because that's the fastest, and that's very subjective, by the way, guys. That's, for me, it is the fastest. And any kind of sweets, so like Jelly Babies, Haribos, and so on, because you have to be prepared for anything. And as I said, you got to prevent, not treat.
Spot on. Thanks, Khalid. And what about you, Hannah? Do you have anything in particular that you carry on you at all times to help you prep or respond?
Very similar to Khalid. I mean, everything and anything. Obviously, being on Omnipod, I do carry injections and pens with me just in case that fails if I was away somewhere. And a blood glucose meter in case my phone dies and I can't look at a CGM or whatever. But I've always got, Lucozade, Haribo, depends where I am as well. I mean, I kind of, in the UK, obviously I get all that. But if I'm somewhere abroad, it's, whatever sugary sweet looks appetizing from the supermarket, basically, it'll be in my bag. So kind of mix up a little bit. I did find a few years ago that my mum was cooking at Christmas time, or she was baking a cake, and there was glazed cherries sitting there and I was low, so I had a couple of them and that worked really fast. So I've now got a big tub of them from Costco that sits in the cupboard just in case.
Brilliant. And Julie, I mean, on that question as well, what do you sort of carry around with you doing your sport and physical activity? But also, just to build on it, do you have any routines, or do you have a particular approach that you might take to physical activity and sport to help you manage that situation?
Yeah, definitely. So what I take is very similar to Khalid and Hannah, really. My insulin pen, I'm on CGM now, so the phone, and every suite. I have glucose gel as well, because when I do ultra endurance, I want to make sure I have the quick shots. Science Sport gel, and also cakes or like biscuit for longer fast action. Have a training plan, so I train regularly. To me, it's important. It helps me manage the diabetes and my blood sugar better. I train usually at the same time, so I know when to reduce my dose before and after based on that.
Brilliant. No, insightful, and definitely routine and having regularity is certainly something that's helped me massively with tackling any form of physical activity with type 1. And how does that play out in your world then, Nia?
Just to add to everything that everybody said, we carry all of that stuff, but one of the things that we've learned is to make sure that he's got more than enough water, so several bottles of it. Sometimes coaches or teachers can't believe how heavy the bag is, but it's because it's got extra water than just what often other children will have. We also make sure when we're skiing or on the side of rugby pitches that everything is waterproof and that there's something to keep the kit warm. Obviously the kit's improving all of the time, but we've often found things freezing sometimes and needing to keep it next to the body or with added sort of cover around it to keep it warm, and extra batteries because of that as well. The batteries run quite low in kind of extreme heat, really. And also we make sure that he carries a little bit of information about diabetes. So if he finds himself in a situation where somebody doesn't know his situation and he can't explain there's something in the bag, JDRF have lots of tiny little pamphlets that are useful for that. And it's just about, I guess, being prepared for the unexpected all of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Being prepared. I think that's a key theme that runs around physical activity with type 1. And Natalie, do you tackle with routines as well? Do you approach with particular routines or particular things that you carry as well around?
So over the years, we've sort of learned what works and what doesn't work for Tom and for us. I will say that recently I've shared a document which I think came from you, Chris, with his football managers about type 1 sport, and that did prompt them to sort of look at what they were doing, and we've added things to their first aid kit, so gels, things like that, so that if I'm usually around, but if I'm not there as he's getting older, and that I do think that is possibly a bit of an issue for young people in sport, always having a parent hanging around training when all the other parents just drop and run. So now I sort of try and sit in the car, and obviously we're there for matches to support anyway, but trying to make him, Tom, more independent is really important, because we're not going to be there forever, and he's going to carry on with sport hopefully. So yeah, we found definitely keeping things such as Hannah said, like a spare, making sure there's a blood meter out there as well, just because he's on Dexcom, it doesn't always work. Making sure that the bag is waterproof, or that he puts it somewhere where it's covered up on a rainy football pitch. And one thing that we've sort of we've worked a little bit recently on food and what works for him, because we do have quite erratic ups and downs with his bloods, and the sort of just things like the squeezy yogurts are quite good to have, because half time it's very quick at football, and he does find it sometimes. I do think he's a little bit self-conscious that he's the one that's having to step out and eat a snack, but with the squeezy yogurts you can just sort of eat those really quickly, and that just gives him a little bit of a boost. So it's just trying to sometimes think outside the box, what works, what doesn't. We've found sometimes that these energy bars are just too much of a refuel, and he'll go very high with those. So I think it's thinking about what works for you and your child, and making a note of that.
Yeah, definitely. And it very interesting that you mentioned obviously the document. I'm going to do a little update on that after the panel as well, because I think it will help, like you said, as young people become more independent, or they want their parents less at maybe their training sessions, giving coaches and organisers a little bit more confidence around managing type 1 diabetes by giving them a little bit more knowledge. So I will talk a little bit around that later as well. So thank you for bringing that up. And Andy, how do you find that in terms of routine? Then do you go with routine? How's it different with maybe closed loop as well, and the technology you're using? How are you finding that?
Well, first thing, just to sort of add to what everyone else says, I don't go anywhere without any glucose tabs, and I find the best way to deal with that is just to outsource it. So every coat pocket, every rucksack, everything that I've got, I've always got glucose tablets in there, so I don't ever have to face that anxiety that we all face before your blood sugar's coming low and you haven't got access to anything. So the closed loop, I mean, every technological innovation has made a huge difference to me. Having the closed loop system is, makes a huge difference, because I can set, I mean, what I'm doing at the moment, because I'm lifting weights mostly, as per the earlier presentations, that tends to drive my blood sugar up whilst I'm doing it, and then down after I've done it. And so I will use settings on my closed loop system, which is I use the loop with a capital L, which is one of the do-it-yourself ones. So my kind of squat setting will double the amount of insulin I'm getting. The algorithm will assume I need twice as much, but I tend to set that for a short time cycle, so that if I forget to change it, it doesn't then carry on. And then I will use a post-exercise setting on my closed loop, so it's aiming for a slightly higher blood sugar reading, and it's making an assumption that I need less insulin. And then I will try to take my carbs in after exercise, where I'm in that period where I'm the most sensitive to it. But there's no doubt, I think that I know not everyone has access to it, not everyone wants to do it themselves, but it makes a tremendous difference when you're exercising.
Yeah, and I think it's something we're going to be spending a lot more time talking around, how people are using closed loops and in physical activity and exercise specifically. I wanted to move to a question from the panel, from the participants now. So Thomas has asked me to ask the panel, what sources of info were beneficial to how you manage type 1? Is there places you reach out to? Are there people you reach out to? Is there information or websites you go to, or has it all been mostly trial and error? So I'll come to Khalid first on that one, if that's all right.
To be fair, I don't have a specific source, so I keep researching pretty much every day. Nothing specific, but I try to build some sort of confluence with what info I find online, and then I trial it on myself, and then see if it works. Before passing it to clients or to followers or anyone, I have to kind of trial it on myself. So there isn't something specific, but I would say just don't ever just take the info online, apply it, and think that's how it's going to work. And then if it doesn't work, then it means that you messed up. No, we're different. We're different. So
it's a bit of due diligence that you'll do first before you 100%. Sort of earn that information. Yeah, which is 100%. Completely understandable. Hannah, is there any sources of information that have helped you on your journey, or people you reach out to get support?
probably just been trial and error for me as well, actually, along the way. There's a couple of people that I've spoken to over the past, but as we all know, everyone is so different living with the same thing. So it's kind of hard to be like, oh, this is what I do, but wait, it doesn't work for me. So it's been a bit of a trial and error actually for me. I don't think there's anything specifically that I've read that I thought, oh, maybe I should do that years ago. I've kind of somehow figured out what to do.
Yeah, understandable. There's a lot of my own journey, very similar, trial and error for a long time. So I get that. Julie, what about you?
Yeah, very similar, really.
Yeah.
I look on Google and then I implement and try on myself.
Yeah, understood. And then Nia, what about you? Slightly different as a parent. So I can imagine maybe this is a slightly different approach to what we're talking about, maybe as those that are living with the condition. So what's your views on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because we do all the research that we can as parents, etc., but we're conscious about how do we build up an opportunity for our son to consciously be doing his own research when he's ready. So what's really heartening to hear from Hannah is, my son's in a position where he's resisting certain things. And our mantra is always, it's his body, it's his condition, it's his life. He needs to choose to do it in his own way. And our responsibility as parents is to create an opportunity for him to pick up whatever he wants and needs when he's ready. Now, whether that's right or wrong, it's just, that's what helps us to get through it. And I suppose whilst we're doing all of the research that, I'm sure many of the parents here today would do, what we're trying to do is make sure that he has opportunity to meet other type 1s, whether that's through activities that JDRF do or support groups that we've found access to, and that we gently or sort of quite naturally point out inspiring figures along the way. So sportsmen, athletes, men and women in different sort of occupations, etc. And I'm just thinking at some point in the future, that might be useful. He might pick up on something that we showcase to him or etc. Because I guess what we're trying to achieve is that he knows that when he's ready, he can pick something up and run with that, whether that's a community or whether it's a piece of resource. Because one of our challenges is actually he has no access to other type 1 diabetics in his current sort of day-to-day life.
Yeah, no, definitely. So it's kind of providing as much information that you can for yourselves, but also then thinking about the future and how that's going to impact long term then on your son's view and who he connects with and how he operates with type 1 as well. Natalie, is that something similar for you? What's your view as well as a parent?
Yeah, so as parents, we when Tom was diagnosed, we were given an information leaflet about a local support group for families and parents living with type 1, and that was really great to sort of go along to. I mean, the first thing that Tom said when we went along to that was, Mum, they've all got a bag. Everybody's got a bag. And, seeing them playing sport and, somebody was treating hypo, and, that was a really great thing to sort of do so early on for us. But I would sort of agree with what everybody said, that we've learned loads, just little things, maybe about packing things for going abroad or different strategies for different things, but they're also individual and they don't always work for us. But it's great to hear those ideas and have a go and think, does that work? No, it doesn't. So we'll stick with what we're doing, or we'll try something else. But I think in terms of what, as like Nia was saying, our son being a similar age, it's about him now becoming independent and moving forward as well. He's not the most organised kid in the world at all. He leaves his bits and pieces everywhere. So it's what has been good about going to the group is that some of the older teenagers that are living with type 1, some of what they're doing and some of the good things that they're doing, I think are starting to filter down to some of the young ones, using the tech, and some of the older ones will check with the younger ones, have you got your kit with you before we go on court if they're doing a tennis session or something. So I think it is good. We also do Google, we look on social media and things, but you know, you really do have to navigate your way through it. And I think the most important thing for us as parents is looking at Tom and what works for him, and it's getting that message through to him. You know, this is you, and you've got to do what works for you. And no two type 1s are the same.
Absolutely great message there to leave us with on that point, Natalie, for sure. And Andy, anything for you to add on that? Is it similar to the other lived experience on the panel as well?
I just absorb information from anywhere and everywhere, but also take it with a pinch of salt, because I think ultimately, you know, you do your diabetes is one of my favourite phrases. You know, you've got to work out how things work. Just because it works for someone else, it may not necessarily work for you. So, but yeah, I think there's loads of resource out there to look at.
Yeah, and I think using those resources, being aware of them, and then also combining it with lived experience and speaking to others seems to be a bit of a theme that we're sort of discussing here, is a kind of using some of the structured education, the knowledge that's out there, but then really taking it on board, like Khalid said, doing a bit of due diligence and seeing whether that works or what's already working for us. Do we stick with it? So no, thank you for all of that insight there from all of you. There's been so many questions in the chat. I actually can't keep up with them. In the challenge we have with time is that unfortunately we're not going to get to all of those questions. I'm going to try and pose one more question, and then I'm going to wrap up the event for us all today. So I'm going to go with one that's been asked a couple of times and link it into other impacts on glucose levels whilst being physically active. So there's been a question around temperature having an impact on what you do in your physical activity. So think a little bit wider than temperature as well. But what impact does temperature have, and what other factors are there that you're considering when you go to do physical activity and exercise? So I won't go to Khalid first because I can see he's got a thinking face there. So I'm gonna go with Hannah first this time.
Obviously I'm fortunate to have been in some sunny climates over the years, so I probably had quite a lot of experience with that. I guess making sure that insulin for a start isn't overheating. I have a Frio pouch that I take vials away with me that I leave in my rucksack, or whether I would just leave it in the hotel and take one out with me a day just in case. I noticed though that kind of the first couple of days when I may be in the heat, if I've not been in heat for a few months, that the blood sugars maybe run a little bit higher and might drop quicker if I take extra insulin. And that's probably the biggest thing that I notice if I take a correction. It's like, oh, well, I've definitely taken a correction because we're now flying down. And then they can be affected later on in the evening with that. But when I've been in the cold over the years as well, I feel I also run a little bit higher. My body's a little bit more resistant to insulin I take, so it's the complete opposite. When I've been on skiing holidays or when I'm at home even and it's cold here, I can run a little bit higher and it takes a little bit longer to come down, but then it might come crashing down later in the night when I've warmed up a bit more. So yeah, I mean, it's all obviously interesting, and the body reacts differently each people, and some people I know that in the heat they might run lower for a while. Whereas the first couple of days, I definitely tend to, my body's more in a bit of a shock, going, what are you doing in this heat? This isn't Scotland. You're a bit high. So yeah, that's probably my experiences. Brilliant, thanks, Anna. Julie, what are your views on that one?
Yeah, so for me, like hotter climate, you know, I've traveled everywhere, and my insulin pen, I've been keeping them with like cooling bag, but most of the time when they're out, if it's not too high, like above like 30 degrees, they've been fine. So that has never really been a problem. And then in very cold water, I just keep the cold weather, I keep them close to my body, so under the jacket, so they keep warm with the body. And in terms of blood sugar, I tend to run lower when it's a high temperature. So usually I either eat more, the more couple of days I reduce my low acting. But for the cold, I never noticed anything very different.
Well, and then Nia or Natalie, what are your views as parents? Obviously, temperature-wise, is there any other factors that you're trying to bring in context to some of the decisions that you might think about for physical activity and exercise?
One thing for us is whether it's a new or different sport, that can really have an impact in both ways. So it might be that when they start doing the sport, it might take particular exertion or nerves that impacts the glucose levels. And then over the years, as he's become more and more familiar with that particular sport, something that was necessary at the beginning is no longer necessary, or vice versa. And equally, you know, now starting secondary school, and we're trying to encourage him to do many different things. Yes, because he loves them, but also so that he learns that it's okay to do something different. And yes, that's going to be scary. And yes, you'll learn something different about your body and how it's impacting your type 1, but that's kind of part of the lesson, like to be able to roll with the punches, really. But what we find with that is that he gets particularly nervous or anxious about whether he has everything, even though the routine that we've always built in is that it's always the same bag, the kit is always replenished every single morning with everything that's needed, to try and take the pressure and the stress out of thinking, do I have everything, just because you're trying something new. But that's really about nerves and adrenaline, really, and it's about how much of that plays a part as well.
Brilliant. Anything to add, Natalie?
Well, I would say that temperature does play quite a big part in our son's type 1, because he is his blood sugars fluctuate quite significantly. When it's cold, he drops quite a lot. He always has. So that has an impact for, obviously, when he's playing football and, you know, in the winter months, because obviously they warm up when they're playing, but it's about, you know, those times at the beginning when he's starting out, and if he's, you know, if he's off for a little bit. So we always, you know, make a point of, if it's really cold, you know, how are you wearing skins, gloves, warm coat, that sort of thing. With high temperatures, he will go really high. So if we are abroad, which isn't very often, but when we are, we really do have to make adjustments on his pump with background insulin, and insulin can be like water. So that, in terms of sport, can have an impact in the summer. If, you know, if we do get some hot weather over here, and for example he's playing a full football tournament, sometimes we struggle a little bit. He's also we also struggle with breakfast spikes, so our carb ratio is very different for mornings. He's always suffered with a breakfast spike. We've got it over control sort of over the years, but that can have an issue if he's then playing football. It's really warm, so, and then it's thinking about how do you manage that high blood glucose and not end up bombing once you're then getting into playing the sport. So or sometimes that high is just so high that then it just keeps going. So there's quite a lot of complications around temperature and activity for us, and it is just seeing what works and what doesn't, and trying to predict what, you know, the good old British weather's going to do, and be armed for that.
Yeah, being prepared and being ready, and having an idea in your mind about, I guess, experiences and that trial and error that you've learned across probably many different experiences, and doing the best you can as you are, whilst being as prepared as you can, I guess, is probably that key message. So thank you so much for all of you joining me on the panel. Unfortunately, in the interest of time, I'm probably going to have to move on just to wrap everything up, but thank you all for giving up your time to be on the panel with me. Some incredible insight there. And I just want to say, again, on behalf of everyone at JDRF, I hope that everybody watching has got a lot from that. And yeah, we'll be able to hopefully do many more things like this in the future, if this is an area which really needs the support. And it feels that, you know, the people that have been involved today, sharing their stories and their experiences, and the community engagement that we've seen today, it feels that this is a really big theme that we'll be doing much more with in the future. So thank you all. I'm now going to move on lastly to finish up with our final presentation from myself, just to round things up from a JDRF perspective about the work we've been doing in physical activity and exercise. Hopefully everyone can now see the slides there, just to finish us off today. I'm just going to spend a few minutes walking through some projects and some things that we've got going on at JDRF that have both happened and are coming up, which you might be aware of, or we think would be a great idea for you to maybe become aware of or get involved with us in the future on. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was the coach's guide in football, which we created very recently alongside our partners on the project, Diabetes UK, the Diabetes Football Community and the Football Association of Wales, because we felt there was an opportunity to provide support for coaches and organisers of football, in this case, to make them more aware of diabetes, because I've heard over many years the community suggest that there isn't a great deal of knowledge sometimes from our coaches and our organisers in sport, and that they would really benefit from greater awareness of the condition within the sport itself. So we've managed to put this in place in the last few months, and it's gone down really well, both in the football community and the diabetes community. So we're hoping actually that this work is going to broaden out away from just football into other sports, and this is something that's going to be progressing in the next few months. Again, we can share the links to this as well if you haven't seen it yet and you would like to see what we've had created and potentially pass that on, and do also get in touch around that. Alongside this, we have also been doing some research into physical activity and movement. So we were focusing it around motivations and the challenges that maybe people have with type 1, essentially to try and learn more from our community about what the future should hold for this theme of physical activity and tackling type 1 diabetes. So the research was conducted just before Christmas on an online survey. Hopefully many of you might have even joined in on that and completed it. And we're now in the process of analysing and gaining that insight, as we hope in the future that's going to provide us with plenty of direction for policies and projects. So that was a really exciting development for JDRF and hopefully the type 1 diabetes community as well. We've also obviously got lots of resources on all different subjects as well, from that, you know, will sit predominantly on our website and that you can download and request as well, which is amazing, and hopefully really useful to you in the type 1 community. So you can see there the website link that you can go to. You can use a QR code as well, which will take you straight there to the website. So yeah, for information, extra support, there is lots and lots of it available on our website. So please do reach there and reach out to us as well if you'd like to hear more about that. There is also opportunities to get involved with us. So from a volunteering perspective. So Insight and Experience panel, if you wanted to provide feedback for us and help us with the direction of future projects, you can get involved in our Insight and Experience panel. You can also volunteer at one of our discovery events in person. So they'll be across the country, across all 4 nations this year in 2023. I'm going to showcase the first physical event in just a second as well. So if you wanted to get involved in that, please do get in touch with us. There's the Youth Ambassador Programme as well, which is now growing, and plenty of ideas and projects coming out of that for young people living with type 1 diabetes, and also fundraising events as well. If you want to support us and our direction and our aims and objectives for supporting people with type 1 diabetes and helping to hopefully one day find that cure, again, please do reach out to us and discover more. This is our first physical activity event of, our first physical in-person event of the year, on the 25th of February in London. So we're going to be at the University of Westminster, Marylebone campus. So if you want to sign up, come down and see us. The community engagement events team, we're all going to be there attending. There's going to be plenty of speakers again, like today, where we'll be providing insight across a number of different themes. So that'll be in London, and there's also an opportunity to speak to our partners and sponsors that have been with us on today's event as well. And then in terms of fundraising, we've seen a couple of these events that have been in the breaks where we've been able to showcase these on slides. But the London Landmarks Half Marathon is coming up on Sunday, the 2nd of April. So if you wanted to join in there, it's one of the few half marathons where roads are closed through central London. So it's a great opportunity to take in some of the sites as well. Places are limited at the moment. So if you do want to get in touch and get involved in fundraising for JDRF, please do as soon as you can. And then one of the slides that you will have seen during the break, hopefully, is Try for Type 1, which is recently launched, brand new fundraising event for JDRF. You can do it on your own or create a team with your friends and family. And you complete the distances your way, whether it's on the road, in the gym, or in the local pool. Throughout the challenges, you'll be sent regular updates and you'll earn exciting rewards as well as you raise money for JDRF. So if you are interested in supporting us and fundraising for JDRF, please do reach out to the team in our fundraising department, and you can find them on events@jdrf.org.uk. And we hopefully will be welcoming you soon to one of our community engagement events. Maybe we'll see you in London or one of our others across the year, or to one of our fundraising events too. And that just leaves me to say a really big thank you to all of our sponsors today that have helped us make this event possible. The amazing JDRF team, which is in the background supporting this wonderful event, helping it all work as well as it can do. And to everybody that's turned up to watch. We hope it's been an event you've enjoyed and taken some great insight and inspiration from. I certainly have. We really appreciate all of your support for what we've done today and for ongoing what we do at the charity. So we are going to be holding the webinar open for a little bit longer, so it gives you a chance to read through the chat and anything you might have missed in any of the Q&As. And also, we'd really appreciate your feedback through our evaluation form. So we will send this out to you on email, but it does help us improve what we do and give us insight around what we should be doing in the future. So if you wouldn't mind completing that evaluation form when it's emailed out to you, that would be amazing. Other than that, it's just a massive thank you from me and from everyone at JDRF for being here with us today. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your Saturday. And please do reach out to us if we can be of any help to you now and in the future on outreach@jdrf.org.uk. Have a great day.